Oh, brilliant. I'm glad we finally got to do this, actually. I kind of returned to Isaac recently. I just love the fact it's one of those games you can just dip into and out of. It's not something that you need to dedicate yourself to, like a Fallout game or anything like that. You don't need masses of investment to make it work.
Right, yeah. I guess, yeah, because it's not... I mean, it's funny, isn't it? It's not... Although it actually is quite a narrative game, it's not narrative in that sense, is it? It's
not sort of classically narrative. It's very clever in that regard. You can sort of play it on whatever level you like. Yeah. So you don't need to go into the symbolism and whatnot, of which there's enormous amounts. I was thinking about it on the walk home from work earlier today, and thinking about how it's got both. It's got this incredible psychological element to it, where there's Freudian stuff mixed with Jungian stuff, all intermingled together, and it's really quite complicated and ambiguous and weird and very, very wonderful. But you don't need to engage with any of that if you don't want to.
Nope. No, it's a genius bit of design. Are you recording?
Yes.
Good,
I always do, just in case there's something that I can sort of splice in, I do this with all my podcasts, just in case,
Yeah, no, cool. No, because just making sure, because this is all good stuff. Yeah, I agree. I think it's... I mean, it was funny actually watching. So you shared a video on Facebook, which is
yes, that was a lucky one. I can tell you.
Talk me through what that was, because I'm really only familiar with the original game, and I know that you're playing Rebirth, aren't you?
Yes. Well, actually, I think this is Afterbirth. This one. Okay. This is the next. This is after Rebirth, and I think there's even another one now. There's the Binding of Isaac Afterbirth Plus, which is essentially the latest version of the game that has all the bells and whistles. So it starts off when you first play it as the basic Binding of Isaac. So everything's the same as the Binding of Isaac. And then the more you play, the more modes and characters and things it unlocks. Right. And the mode I was playing was actually the enhanced version of a previous mode, which is called the Greed Run. And the Greed Run is this... It's very unusual. You don't have floors in the Greed Run. You just have a floor with a button in the middle of it. And every time you press the button, enemies start to spawn, and a countdown starts. And every time the countdown gets to 0, more enemies spawn in. So the trick of the Greed Run is to kill the enemies as quickly as possible. Each wave of enemies you want to kill as quickly as possible. Otherwise, the screen just fills up, the bullets start to fly, and you just can't... It's impossible. And then every time you kill a wave, then you get rewarded with a certain amount of coins. So you can go to the shop, which is just at the top of the screen, and you can buy whatever items you have the money for. And the pool of items in the shop is expanded enormously for the Greed Run. Okay. And at the end of every so many waves, I think it's about 6 waves per level, you get bosses spawning.
Right.
And then you can progress to the next area. And there's also there's an optional thing. You can go for a deal with the devil. The button at the very end of the boss section will get a pentagram on it. And you can either push it or not. You can either just retreat to the next area and start the whole process over again, or you can press the button and then you get an extra boss, which is usually souped up in some way. It's not a standard version of a normal boss.
Oh, okay.
And there'll usually be 2 of them actually on the same floor, either 2 of the same boss or 2 different bosses. Right. And if you defeat them, then you get a deal with the devil.
Okay.
And at the very end of that run, then you get to face, the 7 deadly sins, which are characters in the Binding of Isaac. Yes. You get to face the ultimate version of Greed, which is Ultra Greed, who is enormous and is one of the most difficult bosses in the game. But this run that I was doing is greedier. It's the greedier run, which is the hard version of Greed, basically. Okay. So you not only get to face Ultra Greed, after you've killed him, he becomes a gold version of himself, which is even harder.
Right.
But as you saw from that run, I was quite lucky. I was playing in the way I absolutely love to play this game, which is glass cannon.
Right.
Just just ridiculous amounts of item synergy upon item synergy upon item synergy, all of them incredibly aggressive. It's all damage output in that run, and that's how I particularly like to play. I mean, sometimes the game won't allow for that.
Well, and that's something I think we're going to need to talk about at some point, because I think, for me, one of the most incredible aspects of the game is, the way it connects with the theme is the way the game, almost uniquely, I can't think of many other games that do it as aggressively as Binding of Isaac, force you to adapt your strategy to whatever the game decides to give you.
Oh, it's totally unfair.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I love about the game. I mean, game balance, it really is a significant issue at the moment. People harp on about balance in various different types of games. Fighting games, balance is important. RPGs, balance is important. Sometimes balance isn't important. Sometimes balance is a way of making things anodyne. Whereas this is actually something that Ed McMillan, who designed The Binding of Isaac, it's something he does in all of his games. He makes them patently unfair.
Yeah.
Have you ever played Super Meat Boy?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
That's. I mean, The Binding of Isaac is bad enough. It's totally unfair. One run it will give you everything. The next run it will give you nothing.
Yeah.
You can have runs in The Binding of Isaac that are hideous. They are just perfectly hideous. You will get not only useless items, you'll get items whose synergies act against you.
Yeah, right.
I think everyone has had that run.
I've had that run. Well, I tell you the other thing about it, though, that's absolutely fascinating, but like, it doesn't tell you what any of the items do.
No.
It's all trial and error. You know, like you pick stuff up and you think, oh, maybe that will be helpful. I mean, I'll never forget the first time I picked up an item and I can't remember what it was. It looked like a cat, and I thought, oh, okay. And I picked it up and suddenly I had 1 heart.
Yeah, it's 9 lives.
9 lives, yeah, exactly. Lives, it's like, what a terrible, terrible power up.
Yes, and yet, under certain circumstances, can be really useful.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it can stack.
Depending on like what kind of character you're playing, or depending on certain item synergies. It's one of those really weird things. 9 lives is one of those wonderful items that's always a gamble.
Yeah.
I mean, I always take it. I always take it because it's a guppy item.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah.
For those listeners who are unaware, there is this thing you can do in The Binding of Isaac where you can get certain synergies of items that turn you into a different character. They'll give you certain upgrades, and one of them is Isaac's cat Guppy, who is dead by all accounts, and as a result floats around the screen when you turn into it, and is infested with flies, which become damage multipliers for any damage that you deal out. It's a fantastic upgrade. It's very rare. Very rare. You need to get 3 of the Guppy items to turn into Guppy.
All of which are rare in and of themselves.
Absolutely. And they do tend to, on their own, they don't tend to be that useful, the Guppy items.
No, that's right. They're not super helpful.
So you've got to sort of sometimes take a downgrade and gamble on getting the upgrade later, which you may not.
Which is very Binding of Isaac in a nutshell, right?
Very, absolutely. But I found that's the way I like to play, though. I found that for me, timidity in the game doesn't work.
Interesting.
If I hum and ha about the decisions, should I take that item or not, then I find myself, I don't know whether it's sort of like it's a psychosomatic thing, it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and suddenly I start playing timidly, and that's no good. You assume you're going to lose, essentially.
Right.
So whenever I come up with things like deals with the devil, for example, I tend to go for them.
Right.
Unless they're going to kill me outright, I just tend to go for them.
See, it's really interesting. I think my deal for the devil strategy is I like to keep a buffer zone of like 3 hearts.
Ah, right.
So I'll tend to, but I mean, okay, so I'm playing the original Binding of Isaac where the deal with the devil is simpler anyway. I don't think you can get a deal for the devil on floor 1 on the original version of Binding of Isaac.
It is possible in some circumstances, but you have to be phenomenally lucky to get a deal with the devil on floor 1. You can't naturally get a deal with the devil. There are certain like combinations of cards and things that you can use.
That would make sense.
But that you have to be absurdly lucky to get a deal with the devil on floor 1.
So I mean, what I'll generally do is I'll trade. So if I get stuff like the dog food or whatever on the on the first level, and I get that extra heart early on, I'll be prepared to gamble that extra heart. I might even be prepared to gamble 2 if it's a really good item. If it's something I know I can use.
A damn good one.
Yeah, exactly.
And I tell you, some of those deal with the devil items are game breaking.
Yes, absolutely.
Some of them are.
But I generally like to keep that kind of 3 heart buffer. That tends to be my kind of, unless this is the thing, beauty of the game, isn't it? Sometimes you get if you suddenly get that situation where you've got 5 or 6 blue hearts, you think, well,
why not?
Maybe I'll just make this a blue heart run and just see if I can get through that way, yeah.
Absolutely, and there are certain characters and items that synergize with having no red hearts.
Right.
Your damage output goes up for not having red hearts. If there's what is the character? She has one of the female characters you can play, and when she's down to, I think it's half a red heart or less, she becomes the Whore of Babylon.
Whore of Babylon, right. Which is itself an item you can get in Deal for the Devil Rooms.
That's right. And it's a great item, because if you are doing a blue or black heart run, then you suddenly get this damage multiplier that's one of the best damage multipliers in the entire game.
Yeah.
It can absolutely devastate, particularly in combination with certain other items. It's one of the fun things about this game. I mean, I've played it quite a lot, and I've watched other people play it quite. I mean, that's how I first came to it. I sort of saw other people playing it and became intrigued by it. I saw certain Let's Players that I like playing it, and became intrigued initially by its imagery. I thought the style and the imagery were interesting, and then I started getting interested in the game and thinking, I wouldn't mind playing that. I wouldn't mind having a go and seeing how terrible I would be at it. That was my initial thought. How bad would I be at this game, and how long would it take before it really irritated me?
Right.
Because it's one of those games that does require a certain degree of skill, I think.
Oh yes. Yeah, definitely.
And sort of it's one of those games, again, it's very old school, isn't it, in terms of the way it plays?
It's incredibly old school. I was thinking about this. I mean, basically, it's because it's funny watching, the run through we were talking about earlier, the Ultra Greed run through, which looks like an arcade game, really. I mean, it looks like it's a twin stick shooter a la kind of Smash TV.
Yeah,
really.
that is exactly it. I never thought, but that is exactly what the Greed run is.
Yeah.
It's Smash TV. It's exactly it.
Which is fantastic, because that was a great bit of game design that I think never really got particularly beyond Smash TV. It never really developed as a form in the arcade, but I thought it was a superb form. And although I think you'd have to describe it as a fairly radical reskinning. That's the core of the game mechanic, right? I mean,
totally.
that's the essence of the game mechanic, at least.
I never thought about it, but yeah, you are absolutely correct. It's, I mean, what I've always thought of it as is basically the dungeons from Zelda. That's all it is. It's Zelda without the overworld.
Well, funnily enough, my reference point for it was a ZX Spectrum game called Attic Attack.
Attic Attack! Oh my god!
I think is. Yeah, I think that's the natural kind of grandfather of it, really. And actually, if you think about it thematically, it's not a million miles away.
It really isn't, is it? I mean, in many respects, you kind of get the impression that Ed McMillan may have played Attic Attack, because it's set in the cellar ostensibly. Yeah. It's sort of diametrically opposed to Attic Attack. Yeah, my god, I can actually. The minute you said it, Attic Attack is one of those things I haven't played since I was a kid.
Right.
And
no, me either.
Suddenly, the moment you said it, I've got the title screen and I've got what passed for music on the ZX Spectrum.
Wonderful chipset music. Yeah.
Oh my god, that's. But yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, Isaac is itself technically kind of classic now in terms of video game longevity. It's been
absolutely.
around for a good long. I mean, to give some idea of how long Isaac has been around. It started as a Flash game, didn't it?
Yeah.
You could
I mean, because my own history with Isaac's interesting. So I was. It's got to be sort of 7 or 8 years ago I came across the game, I think. So I was listening. At this point, I just got a PS3.
Right.
And I was trying to get my head around what the gaming kind of what it was like out there, really. And I
Oh,
stumbled across.
Had you sort of been away from video gaming for a while?
Yeah,
or?
so I was a massive PC gamer for a while, and then I reached a point in my life where I didn't have the finances for it, because PC gaming's just expensive.
So expensive.
And then I finally got to the point where I was stable again. And I thought I'll go over to consoles because I'd heard good things about the PS3, but I found a podcast called Idle Thumbs, which I think is still going.
I believe I've heard of Idle Thumbs, and I do believe it's still around. Yes.
Yeah, and I discovered it in a weird. It's completely convoluted. I found it on Kickstarter because I was on Kickstarter for. I think I was backing the Hellraiser documentary at the time because that was a while ago.
Right. So yes, a while back.
The Leviathan. Anyway, and there had been And there had been a campaign. Idle Thumbs had just run a campaign, and it wrapped up. It had finished, but it sort of piqued my interest. So I went and listened to a few episodes of that. And back at that point, when I happened to tune in, they were basically obsessed with 3 games. They were obsessed with Far Cry 2, which I got obsessed with, and they were obsessed with Spelunky, which I later also became obsessed with.
Yep.
I mean, that's we could do a show just on that.
Totally, Spelunky is. It seems there was an era where these games erupted.
Yeah,
these these sort of indie games, and Isaac was one of them. Spelunky was definitely one of them.
Yeah, well, true story. I just got through a run of Spelunky before I put my little girl to bed. We play 2-player, and we just made it to the temple.
Brilliant.
Yeah. And then got trashed by a mummy. It was really annoying. You know those chain event deaths that happen in Spelunky?
Yes.
You get hit by one thing, you fall off something else, then you bash into something else, then you land in a pit of lava, and you're just like, bastards. All that work. It's one mistake.
It's so funny. I mean, it's something I was thinking about before you came on air, and it's kind of been a gradual realization for me, but there is this masochism to these games, isn't there?
100%.
There is this masochistic element, and I think they do appeal to those of us that enjoy that element of video gaming, that sort of earthly plenty quality.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. But the third game the Idle Thumbs boys were really into at the time was Binding of Isaac, and they kept banging on about it, and they kept saying the way they talk about it was what really intrigued me, because someone would say, "Oh, how are you getting on with Binding of Isaac?" and one of them would just sigh and go, "Oh, that fucking game."
Yeah,
you know.
Yes, this is the reaction, isn't it? This is the reaction that people have to this game. It's so love-hate. It's so classically love-hate in a very old school way. It's like an old NES game, isn't it? But with slightly better graphics, in the sense that it's got all of the unfairness of an old NES game.
Yeah.
But
it's that Battletoad brutality.
Yeah, that sort of Ninja Gaiden thing going on. But it's deliberate. I think that's the major difference. Very often, these old NES games, it wasn't necessarily deliberate. It's just because the technology was so basic. It's because people hadn't really realised things about certain elements of how to design a video game. The timing and all of that. So that made them even more difficult. In this game, The Binding of Isaac, I mean, okay, it is sort of technically limited to a certain degree, but the difficulty element isn't as a result of that. Ed McMillan is very eloquent about this, and it's certainly something that's consistent in all of his games. The player must suffer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Basically, it's the Sam Raimi approach to designing video games.
Absolutely. Well, the other one I'm reminded of is Joss Whedon, who was the thing about, like, the thing to do is create interesting characters people really care about and then melt them.
Yeah, which is, I mean, and this is another thing about that I love. This is what got me into Isaac initially. First of all, the name is fantastic.
Yes.
The Binding of Isaac, it's such an evocative name. And I can't remember where I first heard of it. It was on somebody mentioned it on it may have been a video game podcast actually, or on some video game show. And I started seeing bits and pieces of the artwork for it.
Right.
With that wonderful and very particular style it's got, where everything looks like a child's drawing, but it's a very twisted child's drawing. It's all things that children shouldn't be drawing. Shouldn't be aware of in many instances, and it's slightly disturbing. It's cute and disturbing at the same time.
Yeah,
and that's a very difficult thing to meld effectively. It's very difficult to do, but this game does it beautifully.
Yeah,
and then I just went and found it. I think I started watching somebody on YouTube playing it, and became kind of obsessed by it. You know, it wasn't just the video game element, which is fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating because it's endlessly interesting. I mean, you can't not be intrigued by it because it is such a random numbers generator.
Yeah.
Every time you sit down and play this game, I mean, there are channels out there that have made an entire living off of just playing Binding of Isaac runs. There's like literally thousands of runs.
Well, there's two components to that, aren't there? And this is one of the things that I realised about the game. It's just that kind of the other joke from Idle Thumbs was how deep does the rabbit hole go? That was a phrase that they really enjoyed employing from time to time.
Yeah.
And Isaac has got to be one of the most impressive video game rabbit holes I've ever come across. And that's saying something, you know. You're talking to a guy who's sunk weeks of his life into Civ 2 and the original XCOM and the remake of XCOM and games like that. I mean, I know rabbit holes, but I think Isaac may be the deepest, and it's for two reasons. One, that you've already mentioned, that the random number generator means that not just is each run different, but it's remarkably different. And as we've already touched on, and as we've already touched on, because of the randomness of the items, because of how profoundly the items affect the way you play, it really is never the same game twice. But the other facet that feeds in that makes it just like that adds another kind of multiplier to that feeling is that the game changes the more you play it.
Yep.
And the more you succeed at it, and that's the bit that really blows my mind.
Yeah, there's so much to unlock in this game. I mean, when you initially sit down and play the game, what you're playing is the bare bones. When you have your first run, it is the bare bones version of the game. And in order to unlock certain things, the conditions that you have to reach can be so oblique.
Yeah.
And esoteric. They can be so... You have to... Very often, some of the more out there stuff, you definitely need to either be in the right place at the right time, so you're just ridiculously lucky.
Yeah.
Or you need to read a game guide.
You need to spend some quality time with the wiki, don't you?
Totally. And even then, I mean, there are still people who believe that they've done everything on it, that they've wrung everything out of the game, and they are still finding these odd, weird little synergies in the items where they affect one another in such a weird and strange way. Or you know how every time you collect an item, you get a new little visual on Isaac's sprite. So. Every single time you play, even your Isaac is different.
Right.
They're still finding new bits and pieces, and there are still... It's one of those games that naturally foments rumour and conspiracy.
Right, of course, yeah.
So there are people out there who believe that there are little secrets, you know, that nobody's ever found, and knowing the way Ed McMillan designs video games, that wouldn't surprise me in the least.
It feels plausible, doesn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. And of course he keeps adding to it. You know, there are all these new bits and pieces. If you play the current version, which is The Binding of Isaac Afterbirth Plus, I believe, that game is huge. I think there are about 12 different characters to unlock, and some of those are very difficult to unlock indeed. And each of those 12 characters is remarkably different from the others, and each time you complete the game or do certain things with them, it unlocks new stuff, it unlocks new floors, it unlocks new... It's absolutely insane. It's wonderful.
Because one of the things I saw from one of your videos, you showed the challenge list. Now, I've got the original Isaac with the upgrade to the original Isaac, and I can't even remember what that was called now, whether it was Afterbirth or something, but, you know, they did an upgrade to the original version.
Yeah.
And I remember that because that introduced spiders.
Yes.
I actually remember playing the game before spiders, and I remember the first time I saw a spider, I was like, why did I spend money just to torture myself like this?
Absolutely, yes.
Can we not have the flies back? I just about got the flies sussed, and now I've got spiders to deal with.
And the spiders are horrific.
They're bastards. I hate them.
The random movement of the damn things. He's deliberately designed them so that they move like spiders on the screen.
Yeah.
You know how real spiders are so annoyingly unpredictable.
Yes,
You know,
absolutely.
it's exactly like that.
And they skitter. The little fuckers actually skitter.
And also, I swear, I'm sure it's probably not true. It's probably just sour grapes on my part. But I swear, sometimes the little bastards, and it's true of I think many of the enemies on Isaac. Sometimes their movements are different from any other time. So they will move in a way or like further than they normally would. So you make a movement and you think, oh, I'll be all right because I'm out of range of their normal move. No, they'll run right into you.
The leapers are like that.
Oh.
I swear to fucking God, those bastard things have got some kind of fucked up radar on them. It looks random, and then suddenly they all fucking go for you at once. I fucking hate those things. The headless leapers.
Yeah, the ones that when they land, they spray bullets everywhere.
Right, yeah, and then you get the green one that lands and spits out the green goo that fucking
that explodes.
Gasses you. Oh,
yeah,
I hate them so
God,
much.
Yeah. This is how many podcasts about the Binding of Isaac go, ladies and gents.
Just a lengthy list of let me count the ways I hate every single villain in this fucking game.
Just in case people haven't realised, we're talking about the Binding of Isaac. So there's the intro. That's it. We're going to just carry on talking now.
Here we go. 25 minutes in. Yeah.
That's it. That's your intro, I'm afraid. But yeah, I didn't play it for the longest time. I actually just watched people playing it because I found it so fascinating. And at the time I was busy with other stuff. I just moved into this place and I was starting a new job and I had like first short story collection being published and all that stuff.
Right.
So it was with that kind. It was the kind of thing where I was very dubious about it. I was like, I know if I play it, it's going to absorb my life.
Yeah.
I know it, and I don't have time for it. So I'm just going to forget it. I'm just going to watch it. Other people can play it, and that's the end of it. But then it came out on the PS4, and
bastards.
Yeah, and it's quite cheap, it's quite cheap on the PS4, and I thought, you know what, playing it with a control pad might be better.
Yep.
And I just couldn't resist it, and I've sunk hours into it. It's ridiculous, and the thing is, it's one of those games where I do love games that you can dedicate yourself to, where you have to sit and immerse yourself, and you have to engage to get something out of them. It's one of the reasons why I like the Fallout games. There's that wonderful sense that you are in a world, and it's beautiful. But whereas the Fallout games, you feel it when you've tromped across the wastelands, from one end to the other. You've done it. That you get a sense of the time. Binding of Isaac, I find you can play for 3 hours or whatever, and it feels like no time has gone by at all.
Yeah, that's right.
None whatsoever.
And it's just it's such a beast. It's such a beast of a challenge. It's such a bottomless challenge. I was thinking about how when I was watching your video, I looked at your challenge list, and there were literally were there 50 different challenges on there? And the version 50, I've got's got maybe 15, which seemed enough to me. I've got to be honest.
Well, it's a good example of just how brilliantly this game is conceived and designed, isn't it? The fact that you can tweak it just minorly, because each of the challenges presents just a minor tweak for the most part, in order to make it completely different. And each of those challenges is completely different. I mean, some of them are evil.
Yeah.
Some of them are ridiculous. There's one I cannot do it. I just cannot do it. Onan's Streak.
Right.
And Onan's Streak, you cannot miss. If you miss with one of your shots, it hurts you.
Oh no.
Yeah.
No.
Yup.
See, the one I can't do on the original game is the labyrinth challenge.
The labyrinth one. What does that do?
So what the labyrinth does is it basically multiplies the number of rooms on each level by 3 or 4.
Oh yes. And doesn't it make the doors randomised?
No, that's a separate one. There's a different one that does that as well.
Yeah. I remember that one.
The labyrinth one is just the levels are impossibly huge, and you end up with. The good news is you end up with 2 or 3 item rooms every level, so that's nice. But you also end up with 3 boss rooms.
Yes.
Which is not so nice.
Which is not as nice.
It's just a complete bastard.
Yeah.
And the trouble is what's brilliant about it is because it multiplies everything. So in theory, it should just take longer.
Yes.
But what actually happens is, because of that multiplication factor, it means that you hit the far edge of the bell curve more often.
Yep.
So you end up with just those impossibly tough rooms, and you're basically guaranteed to run into, like, not just one of them, but like 3 or 4 of them every single floor, and it just wears you down.
Those rooms that you hate
in
a normal run, but you know that once you've done them, you've done them. They are not likely to turn up on another floor again.
Yeah.
I know exactly what you mean. Whereas that particular challenge, you'll get them a couple of times per floor.
That's right. Every single floor, and it just makes you want to cry after a certain point.
Yeah.
It just beats you.
Again, it's a wonderful thing. I'm fascinated by any kind of media that evokes sensations of that would otherwise be considered negative.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's part and parcel of enjoying horror and media that's disturbing, isn't it? Really, but the fact that the video games are very particular in this regard, and there is a massive culture out there for it. Games like Spelunky and like The Binding of Isaac, very often indie games, it seems, really play into it. It's this desire to be frustrated, this desire to have challenge.
But what I think is so spectacularly clever about Isaac, and why I think it's even in that kind of pool of games we talked about there, all of which are, all the games you've named, I thoroughly enjoy and would recommend to anyone. But I think what makes Isaac, for me, maybe like the still kind of maybe top of the heap even, is that it's the absolutely perfect match of dynamic with theme.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's what makes it so special to me, because when you feel that frustration is perfectly mirroring the frustration of the child stuck in an arbitrary adult world.
Totally.
Unpleasant, random adult authority that makes no fucking sense.
Makes no sense whatsoever, yeah.
Yeah, and the powerlessness that you feel as the player and the arbitrariness you feel as a player is perfectly that is perfectly reflective of...
Totally, that is absolutely it, and it's a rare piece of media that can make that kind of fusion and make it work.
Yeah,
it's almost miraculous, isn't it? Whenever I come across any kind of media that does that has that wonderful synchronization of elements where everything seems to work in poetry with everything else, I cannot help but think to myself that something almost preternatural is happening. It's amazing to me, and that the Binding of Isaac does have that. The frustration you feel, whatever frustration you feel as the player, is part of the experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to be able to anticipate that as a games designer and use it to make it part of the appeal.
Absolutely.
That's a level of genius. It's very clever.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of one of those people. I'm kind of generally resistant to labeling video games as art, not because I don't think that they have value, but because I think they have value as games. And I'm actually one of those people that will plant a flag in the corner that says, no, games are of worth and should be defended as games.
As games, yeah.
Don't feel you need to redefine it as art in order to make it something worthwhile. Fuck that.
That's a fair point.
It's worthwhile because it's a brilliant game.
I've never actually heard it put that way, but yes, I can definitely see that.
It's just, look, we all have our little idiosyncrasies. This is one of mine. But I have to say, Isaac is one of those limit cases where I find it very hard not to describe Isaac in terms of a work of art.
Well, even if not as a work of art, it is certainly artistic.
Oh, unquestionably. Incredibly so. I mean, and I find it just genuinely kind of... Because it does it from the introduction, right? That incredible cartoonish introduction with the mum being convinced by the televangelist and then the prayers to just shut the kid in the basement. and the feeling that when you're playing the game that it's you're playing through Isaac's psychotic break, right?
Yes, this is one of the things that I find most immersive about the entire game. The fact that, and this is something that gets me in video games full stop. Did you ever play American McGee's Alice?
Yes, I did. I haven't played Alice Returns yet, but I have played the... actually, I wanted to talk to you about that. I'm stuck on the Jabberwocky boss fight.
What, in the original?
Yeah.
The first one or the second one?
The second one.
Oh, so the actual fight.
Yeah. It's really
It's
fucking hard.
really bloody hard. That's all I could. That's all I can
fine.
tell you.
Just keep trying.
You've got to use the only thing that will hurt him is the Jabberwock eye staff.
Right. Okay.
That is the only thing that will hurt him, and you need to hit him in the eye.
Right.
Which makes it very difficult, and you need to just keep fighting until he goes down.
Right, and you got to keep. I know you got to keep running back and forth to get the heart spawns as well.
Yeah,
but
that's the only way to do it. I mean, what you can do, you know, the Jabberwock spawn that he creates. He will kill them as well when he does his flame attack. You can sort of dart out of the way and utilize him to get your health back. But he is difficult. He's probably the hardest boss in the game.
Yeah, good. Okay, I'll not feel too bad that I've been stuck on him.
No, he's a bastard, the Jabberwock.
Because I've been promising myself I won't play Returns until I finish. Because they when they shipped Returns, they shipped it on the PS3 disc with the original Alice game.
That's right. Yeah.
And I beat the original Alice game on the PC when it came out. And it was funny actually because my dad bought it and he was like, I can't play this. Can you play it and let me watch because I want to see it.
Oh, I lost you for a brief moment there.
Oh, I'm sorry. You all right?
Yep. Sorry. Could you just go back to?
Okay.
You said that you were playing through the original Alice before you played Madness Returns.
All right. Yes.
It just dropped out there.
Okay. So I basically bought Alice Returns and it was shipped with the original Alice, and I promised myself I wouldn't play Alice Returns until I'd re-beaten the original Alice, and now I'm stuck on this boss fight. And I have the sick part of this, which you'll appreciate as a gamer, is
totally.
I have actually beaten Alice before. I beat it when it first came out on the PC. My dad bought it, couldn't play it, and made me play it so he could watch me play it. So I have actually beaten Alice, but because I haven't beaten it on the PS3, I won't let myself play Returns until. And it's just at this point, it's just like, what is wrong with me?
No, I totally appreciate that. I really, really do. I built my first PC to play Alice. You know.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
okay, yeah.
I saw it in video, in like magazines. I think it was in PC Gamer or whatnot, and I was like, yeah, I've got that. Just everything about that.
Now you see, I think Alice is one of those great examples of a game that that was so misunderstood.
Yep,
you know,
totally.
I really do feel that Alice, and again, it's one of those games that's kind of the feelings it's trying to evoke are far more important than the mechanics of the game itself.
Totally, because the game itself is just a passable platformer.
Yeah,
it's a decent, well-made three-dimensional platformer for the era. That's about it. It's got a few bugs, it's got a few niggles. It's sometimes hideously unfair with its instant death traps and drops and puzzles and things. But the thing that really works for Alice is its aesthetics. Its aesthetics are out
beautiful.
Of this world. My favourite bits in the original Alice is when you're very early on, sort of when you're wandering through, say, a hallway or a corridor or something, and it splits, and you just get to see the delirium swirling behind it. That madness, that pure insanity.
Yeah.
I just love that. Whenever I played through the game, I always used to get this wonderful sensation whenever I saw that. This sort of almost like insanity itself, like this slipping feeling, like you're sort of vertigo almost, like lurching forward into the great funnels of light and colour. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful, and also the metaphorical freight of it. It's the fact that you are playing hello?
Hiya. You're back.
Having some technical issues with Skype this evening. It keeps dropping out, which is slightly annoying. But yes, it's the fact that you are playing... you are wandering through this diseased psychoscape. This wonderfully blighted imagination that's crumbling around you, and it's diseased and it's corrupting. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing.
Fantastic.
And it's exactly what
like
Isaac
you. I remember.
does.
I mean, the hospital corridors. I remember vividly the padded cells and the. I mean, my favourite. I always have a yen for that kind of setting, but I think Alice does it better than any other game. Maybe when you're inside the clock. You know,
Oh yes.
and it's
Oh yes.
punishingly tough. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a tough bit of platforming, but it just looks so fantastic.
It does, and you also have the wonderful encounter with the Mad Hatter at the end of that.
Yes,
Which is
yeah.
stunningly good. Stunningly good. But yes, I mean, in terms of theme and subject, it's very much exactly what Isaac does.
Yeah,
You have exactly the same thing going on. It's very difficult to tell what's literally happening and what
Right.
isn't in The
Right.
Binding of Isaac, as it is in Alice and in Madness Returns. I mean, just going back to the Alice games briefly, Madness Returns is a really interesting game, but it's not as honed as the original.
Right.
It has beautiful images, it has some amazing segments, but it is unfinished.
Oh, okay.
That's the only issue I had with it. It did ship unfinished. And this is something American McGee, the creator, has been very, very candid about. You know, he said we ran out of time, we ran out of money. So it's just something you have to bear in mind when you play it. It's
Sure.
not quite the finished article, and you can feel that certainly, but it's still very, very interesting and a more than worthy successor, I would say.
Right. But I think it's interesting because when you draw Alice as a comparison spot, it's immediately I know immediately what you're talking about, and I get that instinctive kind of feeling. Yes, it is. It invokes a similar feeling, but I mean, Isaac is a near perfect game.
Yeah.
In terms of the mechanics, isn't it?
Well,
I mean, because it's unfair, but it doesn't, and it's even arbitrarily unfair.
Totally.
But it's not arbitrarily unfair in the same way that Alice was.
No, it's not. I mean, in Alice, you do get the impression that the arbitrary unfairness is maybe because of a lack of time, or because
Right.
they just didn't have time to maybe playtest certain things all the way through.
No, the genius of Isaac is you always feel like it's your fault.
It's your fault, yeah. Even when it isn't, even when it is the game just being a total wanker to you, which it is. The game is
frequently.
it's evil to you. But again, as I said earlier, there is such an appetite for that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I think it has bloomed in the indie scene of about a decade ago when Isaac really first started to take off.
Yeah.
Because there are loads of games from that era. And loads of game designers who have come out and have since gone on to greater things, like Ed McMillan, you know?
Yeah.
But now that's actually found a niche in the mainstream with games like Dark Souls and Bloodborne and whatnot, which has
Sure.
exactly the same quality about it, where they are punishingly unfair.
Yeah.
They make no bones about it. Make absolutely no bones about it. Isaac does exactly the same thing. It does not apologise for being unfair.
No, but it's interesting, and you're right. And I mean, I have beaten Demon Souls. I haven't beaten Dark Souls yet, but I note the yet. I intend to.
You intend to do it, yeah.
Before I die, I'll beat Dark Souls.
Yes.
Maybe not Dark Souls 2, but in Dark Souls, I've got to the point where I've got to fight a gigantic wolf with a sword in its mouth, and
Yeah.
you know, I'm sure it's doable, because that's the other thing about Dark Souls, the genius of Dark Souls, it is doable.
Well, it is every single time. It's one of the things.
Yeah.
I mean, we did. My friend Andy Millman and I actually discussed this on the previous podcast because
Right.
we actually did Dark Souls and Bloodborne. But
Oh, fantastic!
yeah,
Listen up for that.
we had a load of fun doing it. But yes,
Yeah.
in the Dark Souls and Bloodborne games, the thing is they feel impossible.
Yeah.
Always, when you first encounter anything, it feels impossible, and it just something clicks.
Mm-hmm.
You realise how to do it. You learn how to do it.
Well, I'll never forget the moment in Demon Souls where I was facing one of probably like the penultimate boss, certainly one of like the last half a dozen bosses, like really, really tough guy. And I was getting murdered until I realised he was called the Blind King and he had a blindfold on it. And when I swapped in all my stealth items, suddenly I could fight him. And I was like, okay, you got no one to blame but yourself. That this took you like 4 hours of gameplay to figure out.
Totally. This is exactly it. This is exactly it. And Isaac does exactly the same thing. It really does. It makes again. It evokes emotions that would ostensibly be negative anywhere else. You know, it makes you feel bad. You're the failure. You're the one that can't do this ostensibly massively simple game that technically apes the games of like 2 or 3 decades ago.
Yes.
Because it essentially plays like Zelda or like Attic Attack.
Yep.
So even that makes you feel bad. It's it's quite.
Well, Christ,
brilliant.
even Smash TV's like 25 years old at this point, right?
God almighty, yes.
You know what I mean? Like these are ancient mechanics.
Yeah, it is, but it's tried and tested. You know, they work so well, and the game just takes them and it exaggerates them, and it layers in all this other stuff. It layers in some elements of bullet hell, for example. Yeah. So, you know, there are some sections where the screen is so full, it's impossible to tell what's going on.
Right. Well, actually, I mean, I discovered it because my laptop is a fairly low powered one, and I discovered actually my processor can't cope with playing Binding of Isaac and recording it at the same time, which is actually very handy because I filmed when I was filming for our discussion. I filmed a run and I actually managed to get to Shoal, which I've never managed to do before. And I got to the final boss fight. I
saw.
Shoal.
Yes, you got Brimstone, didn't you?
I did, purely because it was running so bloody slowly. I could actually make it through. I still died right before beating him though. I was so annoyed.
Oh God, and to have Brimstone as well, which is such a rare item. Yeah. If you can get Brimstone, you will have a funner run than most others, because it is such a powerful offensive weapon.
Yeah.
It's fantastic, and you know, in the newer versions, there's all these synergies with it.
Right.
So, for example, if you get Mum's Knife and Brimstone, which are two of the most powerful weapons in the game, then that beam of blood becomes a beam of knives.
Wow.
Just streaming out of Isaac's mouth.
Yeah.
And it's fabulous. It is absolutely fabulous.
Again, though, it does require you to adjust, because if you're used to like a quick fire approach to the game, you have to change the way you use your weapon, because it takes 2 or 3 seconds to charge up before it fires. So it does force you to completely change your approach to how you deal with combat when you pick it up, and that means the first few times you pick it up, even though it's immensely powerful, you will die.
Oh yeah, because you won't know how to use it.
Because you're using it wrong.
Yeah, you won't know what's going on, so you'll be doing your normal quick tap, and that's not going to work. Isaac's not going to charge up. It changes the dynamic of the game completely.
Yes, completely.
And there are lots of items that do that, like the Dr. Fetus items. For those who don't know, Dr. Fetus was the bad guy from Super Meat Boy, and his shtick was they used to drop bombs on you. So what Dr. Fetus does is it gives Isaac a very spiffy top hat and monocle, and it also turns your tears into bombs, which can hurt you.
Oh God!
Yeah, so you can imagine, immensely powerful. It's a brilliant item if you can get it, but if you don't know how to use it, you will kill yourself.
Right.
Very quickly. Yeah. And there are certain synergies with that are entirely negative. Like, for example, if you get there's an item. I don't know if it's in the original Isaac, but it's a cracked mirror, and it's basically reflective tears. So when you fire your tears, they boomerang around and come back at you and linger on the screen for a while.
Right, okay.
If you've got Dr. Fetus, the bombs boomerang around and come back at you.
That doesn't sound terribly helpful.
Actually, it's one of the worst synergies in the game. It's suicide. There is a challenge run that gives you exactly that combination of items and asks you to complete the game.
Good luck.
Yep, very best of luck to you. But I mean, as we were discussing, beyond the game, you have these other elements all melded in. So the aesthetics, which are, it's like this weird, disturbed children's drawing aesthetic. Yeah, it's powerfully distressing.
Oh, it's really horrific. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's the cliches. It's the horror movie with the abused kid, and the abused kid is asked to draw a picture of what home looks like in crayon, and they draw this thing, and you look at it, and you're like, okay, things are really bad.
Yeah, it's exactly
that's the aesthetic of the entire art style for the whole game.
Yeah, and as a result of that, everything is rendered in this it's slightly innocent, childlike way. Even stuff that shouldn't be rendered in innocent terms. Yeah, it's really, really disturbing. There's all of this wonderful, hideous sort of Freudian stuff as well, like the stuff to do. There's lots of shit everywhere.
Yes.
There's lots of uterine imagery and lots of effluent and lots of scatological stuff. Yeah, and it's stuff that it actually makes you feel a little bit queasy.
Oh, they're functionally they're turrets, but they look like boils or pustules.
Yes, yeah.
And they swell up and then they burst and they fire stuff out at you. It's just, God almighty, it's
everything
foul.
in it is gross. Even, I mean, when you look at the bosses, for example, and the bosses are wonderful. They're all absolutely superb when you first encounter them. They all look like deformed or twisted versions of Isaac.
Yes.
Almost every single one of them. And I love the implications of that. The game doesn't, beyond the opening credits, the game doesn't really have a story per se.
No.
It's a story that you create based on the imagery, based on the whatever metaphor you happen to take from what's on screen. The implication of the bosses is really interesting. What are they exactly? You can take them very literally and say that they are maybe Isaac's siblings. Maybe they are Isaac's deformed siblings that the mother has chucked down into the cellar. Or you could take the route that the entire thing is indeed a sort of psychoscape, that it's like a dreamscape, and these are aspects of Isaac. They're somehow characteristics, they're manifestations of his neuroses and of his fears and of his desires and dreads and whatnot, as a result of his abuse. You could write a thesis.
Oh, it's so good. I mean, because there's the mini-bosses which are named after the 7 deadly sins.
That's right.
And they just crop up randomly. And I think my favourite of them is Lust, who's this pink, slightly pinker, slightly more sweaty version of Isaac that spends his entire time just running towards you.
Yes, just chasing you around.
It's really disturbing.
Also very diseased. It's a really hideous version of... I mean, traditionally, whenever there's an incarnation of the sin Lust, it's exactly that. It tends to be rather alluring. It tends to be beautiful. Yeah. This version isn't.
No, because that's the thing, is it's a child's version of Lust, and for a child, Lust is actually unnatural.
Exactly, yes. It's not
understandable.
It's something monstrous. It's something monstrous and impositional.
But also not really understood, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the part of the horror is the unknowingness of it. Like, what even is this thing?
Yeah,
I know it's wrong. It makes me feel bad. I don't know what it is. Oh, it's incredible, and that's just a mini. But that's just something you might walk into. You may
just randomly walk into, and of course, in the later versions, there are upgraded versions of these entities. So there's super lust and hyper lust, and they're all slightly different. They're not just like bigger versions of the character. They're all slightly different, so they represent different aspects of that sin. It's very clever. It's very clever stuff.
But then you have stuff like, so there's the giant, I'm struggling to remember the name, but there's the giant bouncing head with the cleft palate.
Oh, Monstro.
Monstro, right?
Monstro.
Which is, yeah. I mean, it's a very tough fight, and then you get Mecha Monstro in the original game, which is souped up version, which is even more of a pain in the neck. But yeah, it's
so weird, isn't it? Monstro is one of those wonderful, and the animation on Monstro is great. I can sort of picture him in my head now. The way he sort of leaps around, and he's got that big goofy smile on his face. He's one of those bizarre creatures that is simultaneously distressing and kind of cute.
Yeah.
Because he does have this quality of being, it sounds absolutely awful, but of being deformed and indeed deficient.
Yeah.
As though there is some kind of condition going on here, because he seems perpetually happy. It seems and this is something you get from a lot of the monsters in Isaac. A lot of them don't seem to be. They harm Isaac because of what they are, because of their sort of natural byproducts or whatever, not because they're hostile towards him.
No, and in fact, so many of them, I mean, the obvious one is Lust, but so many of them are actually reaching out to him or trying to get to touch him. That's quite a common thing, like that one, the one we've been talking about bounces towards him, and there's also there's a couple of different versions where you have a larger figure tied to a smaller one, and they're always trying to catch you. They're always trying to catch Isaac, running around after you and chasing you around.
There are some really fascinating implications of the whole thing. There really are, and attached to all of this imagery, and it does go very deep, and it goes deep in multiple different ways. Once you've done the initial run and you've defeated Mum, who is the ogress, like the big monster in Isaac. She's sort of like the encapsulation of all of his neuroses. She's the source of it all. So she's taken on the quality of being this ogress in his mind. Then it becomes Freudian to the nth degree, because you actually the time you play it, you go to the womb.
Yeah, you beat mum and you think, oh, I've beaten mum again, and you've beaten the game, and no, this time there's another trapdoor.
You go to the womb this time. It's almost like, well, I mean, what are the implications of that? Is it Isaac trying to perform like a self-abortion? Is it suicide? Is that what it's talking about?
Yeah.
Is that what it's talking about?
Well, the interesting thing is, isn't it, once you get through the womb, if you get to the second final boss fight, the big boss fight, you're defeating mum's heart. That's what you're ultimately burrowing towards.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's like the final confrontation, final with an asterisk, because as we both know, there's
so much more. Because once you,
under certain circumstances, things can go beyond even that. Yeah.
Once you've initially defeated Mom's heart, of course, that boss changes.
Yeah.
It becomes It Lives, which is this fetus. It's this fetal form of Isaac. So, what are the implications of that? Is it Isaac aborting himself? Is all of this occurring in the womb? Has he not even been born yet? Is it some child dreaming of the abuses and the horrors of waking reality and deciding to abort itself?
Or is it just a psychological regression that's just going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper? Where it's like, and maybe Isaac comes out the end with the mind of a newborn child. You know what I mean?
Like cleansed almost. It's
exactly,
almost like
just
a cleansing.
Self-destructed right back to day one.
Wow, that's. I like that interpretation a lot, because that actually does, at the very least, that also lends things a slight glimmer of hope as well. As horrific as it gets. yeah, actually, knowing Ed McMillan, it probably isn't, no. But the interesting thing is, after you've done that, after you've done the, whatever it is, the sort of self-abortion, then you get it moves on from being Freudian to being Jungian.
Yeah.
Because then you start getting the religious stuff, the occult stuff. You either go to Sheol, which is it's the first level of hell, or you go to the cathedral, which is effectively heaven.
Right. Now I have a confession to make at this point, and I'm going to just hit you with a couple of numbers here as we do this, because I think it's a worthwhile point to do that. So I've looked this up on Steam. And I've logged 120 hours on Binding of Isaac, and that's the original game.
Yeah, wow, that's
so.
I like the fact that it's 120 hours, because that just reminds me of 120 Days of Sodom, and that seems to fit.
Yes, and there are some thematic connections there. and I'm looking at my screen here, and I've unlocked 34 of 99 achievements during that time. Now I'm not the best gamer that's ever been. There will be, and I certainly didn't take a systemic approach to Binding of Isaac. I deliberately didn't, actually, because it took me 40 hours before I looked at a Wikipedia page, and that was deliberate because I wanted to experience not knowing what the hell I was doing with the game. And I wouldn't take that back for anything. It was an amazing experience to just play through this game and just be overwhelmed by it, just be brutalised by it. I remember I actually had hand-scribbled notes where I was trying to figure out what the tarot cards did.
Oh, right!
And somewhere I've still got these. And it's like, and I'd write something and I'd say question mark, because I've only used it once. Next time it might do something different. I don't know. The teleporters were the ones that took me ages, because all you know is you teleported, but you don't know if where you've gone is significant, or whether it's random, or... It's a fucking game. Anyway. But so there you go. So 120 hours, 34 of 99 achievements, 34%. And the most recent achievement I've got is the fetus.
The fetus, God. So that's...
Yes. And that's illustrated with a red jar with a pink thing floating inside.
Yeah. Yeah,
so I've given all those numbers... I'm about to tell you, I've never made it to the cathedral. Really? I know it's there. I've never been. I've been to Sheol a couple of times. I've never made it to the cathedral. So... The
cathedrals, it's evil.
Right.
It's absolutely evil.
Sheol's pretty tough. I mean, every single room is a boss fight down there. So
it's exactly the same in the cathedral. Okay. I don't want to. I don't want to get into spoilers here for you, unless you're.
No, I don't mind. At this point, I really don't mind.
Okie dokes. Well, that's where it gets really weird, because at the end of the cathedral, when you fought your way through, and believe me, it's punishing the cathedral, right. unless you've got one of those runs where you really are just kicking it. You don't even have to look. You can just hold down the button and everything dies, basically. Yeah. You face Isaac.
Wow.
You actually find Isaac in the depths of the cathedral, and he is crying on the floor, and you have to fight him, and then he becomes an angelic version of himself.
Right.
And then you have to kill him. And what happens when he dies is he doesn't necessarily die, he ascends. There's like a beam of light and he sort of ascends, so that I don't know what the implications of that are. And there are even flaws after that in the newer version.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there are flaws upon flaws upon flaws. And there's even a flaw after Sheol as well.
Wow. Because I think the thing that most excited me about the game, and I think the reason that I've logged 120 hours and I know I'm not done with it, is exactly that feeling of just that there's more to be discovered. I mean, you know, going back to those first 40 hours when I deliberately was avoiding Wikipedia pages, and I was just, by the way, I went in blind. I didn't, all I heard was these guys on this podcast talk about it, so I didn't even know what it looked like.
So you didn't actually know anything about it?
No, I went in completely blind.
Wow.
Which was a wonderful experience.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. But I remember things like, I mean, vividly, I remember the first time, by sheer accident, an explosion went off near a wall and doorway.
Oh, yes.
And you heard that musical sting.
Uh-huh.
And I was nervous to go in.
Yeah, because you don't know what's in there.
I was like, this can't be good.
Yeah. Well, odds on, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Odds on.
I remember the first time I accidentally left a bomb near, or again, a similar thing where an explosion went off near one of the fruit machines and it blew up and money came out. And I was like, oh, you can just blow them up.
Yep. And there are lots of different
stuff.
Secrets from that, of course. When you've blown them up enough, you realise that actually on very rare occasions you'll blow them up and a very unique item will come out.
Right.
You know? It's that kind of thing. There is this. It's very bog basic for video games. I mean, this is not new. This is Zelda. This is before Zelda. You know, this is, as we were discussing, there were ZX Spectrum games that did this. Yeah. But it's just that element of discovery. It's that notion that, you know what it's tapping into? It's something that I think about this quite a lot. You know, when you first played video games as a kid, when the first video game you ever played, and you have no notion of what the parameters are.
Yes.
You've no notion, like, I remember playing my first video game on the Commodore Amiga, like, way back, and I didn't understand at that time that the layers of background were not places you could go.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Absolutely.
To me, it seemed perfectly logical that you should be able to go and explore those deep, dark woods, even though they're featureless layers of parallax, you know?
Yeah.
It seems perfectly logical to me. And what games like The Binding of Isaac do is they tap into that.
Yeah.
They actually give that to you, where it's, you can actually go and explore. And there will be secrets, all those things that you thought were in the video games but weren't because of technical limitations or whatever. They're there now. This game is going to surprise you. It's going to endlessly excite and titillate and shock you.
And that's what fascinates me, because as you were saying of that, I've just been thinking about, you know, the time you talked about that. There was a boom, wasn't there? There was a brief indie boom of games like this.
Totally. It was huge.
And I think I'd chuck in, was it Braid as well? And there were a few others like that.
Braid really was the one that, it maybe wasn't the first, but it was the one that kicked it off. It was the one that made it profitable, basically.
It kind of mainstreamed it in a way, didn't it?
It really did.
Braid really took off.
Well, people started they started paying attention then.
But if you think about it, what all those games have. So if we take Braid, we take Spelunky, we take Isaac, take Meat Boy. What all those games have in common is a very retro feel, right? They all, in various ways, look like earlier generation, like on the surface at least. You know?
Yes, totally.
And often in the base mechanics as well, although there are permeations. Then think about the age of the people who made them, and this is something that I've spoken about before. And you and I are of a unique generation in human history, where not only did we grow up with video games, but crucially, video games grew up with us.
Yeah.
You know?
Totally. We've seen the evolution of it. So like when we went through our adolescence, for example, so did video games.
Yeah, exactly right. Because we had GTA and then GTA 3 came out at exactly the times in our lives when we were hitting that period of like young adulthood, right? And so we were ready for those games, man. We were excited about them. So, you know, when you're aged between 16 and 21 or something, you pay the hooker and then you get your money back and then you drive off and then there's a cliff and that's all, you know, your mind just goes there. It's fantastic, you know, and you kind of engage with it on that level. And I think that when thinking about this boom and when it happened, it's clearly the generation who grew up on Attic Attack and Metroid and all of those games, you know, and it's there. I mean, it really is a love letter to those. I mean, you know, Spelunky is a love letter to Mario, right?
Yeah, because it is just those base mechanics, isn't it? It plays so Mario.
Yeah. But it just chucks in this extra layer of, but we're also going to do things where, like, oh, look, here's a key and a chest that gets opened by the key. Oh, now you've got this object. What does that do? I don't know. Oh, look, it's making a funny noise on a different level. What does that mean? And it doesn't tell you anything, but gradually, I mean, Spelunky's brilliant like that because it opens up for you like a flower. Yeah. You know, you peel it like an onion, however, you know, pick your metaphor. But there's a beauty to it. I stuck with the flower because of the beauty to it. Like, it makes sense instinctively. You start to piece it together and there's a secret door. Oh, now I'm in a different version of the level. There's a big shop. You know, and it's so clever the way it nudges you towards it. Whereas I think Isaac is kind of, as we've discussed, Isaac's more hostile, right?
Oh, totally.
Isaac's more like, just fucking figure it out. Yeah. And when you find stuff in Isaac, it's so exciting. I mean, I remember, like, the other big one I remember is the first time. So I don't know if this is carried on, but in the original game, most of the rocks are like dark brown. Some of them are almost black.
That's right.
And the black ones contain ghost hearts when you blow them up.
Or other things, you know.
Or other things,
The secret rocks, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I vividly remember the first time, because, you know, once in a while rocks would blow up, once in a very long while a heart would pop out. I thought no more of it.
Yep.
I will never forget that feeling when it clicked with me. Oh, it's the dark ones.
It's the dark ones, absolutely, yeah. And I mean,
suddenly the game's actually just a little bit easier. Because you've got another source of items on those first, you know, those crucial first couple of levels when you're so resource poor, and you keep seeing locked doors and thinking, God, if I could just get a key, or you go to the shop and it's that item. If I could just get that on the first floor, I'd be so happy. But I don't. I am missing one coin. And the game's not going to give it to me. I got to the point with Isaac, it's trained me, like, if I don't have enough money, I won't even use the key on the shop, because fuck you, I don't want to see what I can't afford.
Totally, it's just a waste of a key, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. What I'll do is complete the rest of the level and see if I've managed to find enough pennies buried in shit to make it worth unlocking the shop.
It's funny, because there are people who... there's a guy called Biznap, for example, on YouTube, and he does this thing where he min-maxes the game. And this is something you can do in Isaac. You can basically break the game through various different ways, like through gambling and whatnot. There are certain things you can do that just completely make Isaac obscenely powerful. And watching the things you can do to actually break the game is incredible. It's they're built-in elements of the game, but you have to discover them. You have to actually work at them in order to learn them. And it's incredible. And there are multiple ways of doing it. That's interesting. They require a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of patience, but it can be done. And it's that as well. It's the fact that you can actually mess about with the game mechanics and find things that maybe Ed McMillan didn't even intend, but which are just byproducts of the way the game works and have become part of it.
I mean, I just love... I mean, you know, one of the other things I immediately think of, like... Now, I know that part of this is because elements of the game unlock as you go. Yeah. So it's not necessarily... that some of these elements weren't there when I first did my first run-through or even beat the boss for the first time. But, like... I remember, like, the space between the first time you see a devil room. And that's the other thing. So you find a devil room, you go through the door, you don't even know what it is.
Have no
idea. There's these
idea.
items with hearts underneath. What does that mean?
Yeah, exactly. And you get that wonderful chord, that sort of, you know, that eerie chord when the door opens, and you're thinking, do I want to go through that ominous black smoky door?
And I remember the first time I did it, picking up the thing and going, "Oh, that's cool. What does that do?" And then looking up and realising I'd lost two hearts.
Your hearts.
Fucking course.
Yep.
This bastard game.
Of course, yeah. It's not going to give you something for free. Although, does the original game have the deals with the angels?
There's the angel rooms. Yeah, well, that's what I was coming to. So I've since kind of worked out, like, basically, if you can defeat the first boss without taking a hit. In fact, if you can defeat the second boss without taking a hit, if you can get through the first two levels without taking a hit, you're almost guaranteed to get a deal with the devil room open, right? I'm still not sure what triggers angel rooms.
I don't know. Your faith has to be high for them to trigger, but I don't entirely know how to get your faith up. There are certain items that do it. The Bible, the Rosary, all of that stuff puts your faith stat up. But I don't know how you do it otherwise. I mean, with the deal with the devil rooms, it's hits, basically. You need to avoid taking damage. If you avoid taking damage on the first 2 floors, then you're guaranteed a deal with the devil, pretty much. Especially in the boss rooms. If you don't take damage against the boss, then your likelihood of getting a deal with the devil just shoots up dramatically. But the angel rooms, I honestly don't know what triggers them.
And isn't that great?
Yeah, you know, it's brilliant.
120 hours into the game, I still haven't got a clue.
I mean, again, there's a kind of big ass spoiler.
Never mind. Right. So you were about to give me a big ass spoiler.
I was about to give you a bit of a big ass spoiler. Yeah. See, regarding the deal, the angel rooms, I don't think it won't. No, it won't do it in the original version of the game. But you know the angel statue in the middle of the rooms with the blank face. In the current version of the game, if you lay a bomb behind those statues and wait for it to go off, it wakes the angel up, and you fight it as a boss fight. It's very tough, very tough. But if you kill it, you get half of a key, and then what you have to hope for is that you get a second angel room at some point, which is highly unlikely. And you do the same again, and you fight a slightly different angel boss fight, which gives you the next half of the key. Now, as before, the game tells you nothing. It tells you nothing what you have to do with this key. This key just follows you around like a familiar. But it's a familiar that doesn't do anything. It doesn't have any in-game effect at all.
Right.
The only way you would know what it does is if you happen to get through the womb, if you happen to kill It Lives, if you happen to ascend to the cathedral, if you happen to beat the cathedral, if you happen to beat all of Isaac's forms at the end, you get a bonus level called it's Isaac's toy chest, essentially. And Isaac's toy chest is it's a gauntlet. What the designers have assumed is that, you've gotten through the cathedral, you're going to be a tank at this point. You are going to be very powerful. So it's just this interconnecting labyrinth of identical rooms, they're all the same, that spawn not just 1 or 2, but usually 3 or 4 bosses at once. And they're usually souped up versions of the bosses too. It's insane. And every time you kill one, you get an item. Every single time you kill one. Okay. It's mental. But in the first room that you spawn in, there's a very, very big, ornate locked door. And that's what the key's for. And if you happen to have the key when you get there, the key activates, zooms into the lock, and all of these elaborate mechanisms start to activate, and the door grinds aside. And if you go through, you end up in this vast dark space where it's like you're on a cliff edge, with just darkness surrounding you, and there's a pentagram in the middle of it. And if you step in the pentagram fills with blood. You hear like a roar and laughter, and up from the darkness comes Mega Satan, who is like one of the uber secret bosses in The Binding of Isaac, and one of the hardest. It's insane. If you haven't got certain items, and if you haven't got certain synergies, you're just going to die.
And the other thing is that's worth remembering for people who listen to this, maybe not super familiar with the game, you will have sunk probably at a conservative estimate an hour's worth of playing time to get to that point, right? I mean, when you think about the number of levels you got to get through to get to there, you've been playing solidly for an hour.
Yep.
And you're having the run of your life. and then
yes, then
this is what we're talking about when we describe this game as being something that just keeps punching you in the face.
Oh, absolutely. You can. What I've found is you can be having the best run ever. And suddenly you let it go by accident. You get lax, basically. You assume, I'm gonna win, and something comes out of nowhere and it just kills you.
You see, interesting. I have the opposite thing. I know I've got this I've got a performance anxiety thing in gaming that will get me sometimes. You know, I'll get to a certain point and it's like I think of it in terms of Spelunky because that's the one where I still haven't beaten the hell run yet. And you'll get to this point because I guess I should explain what that means very, very briefly. In Spelunky, you beat the game by beating the big golden head, but if you complete a ridiculously weird, obscure mission on each level, and when I say mission, no one tells you you've got to do this.
No.
You just have to work out that it's something you've got to do on each of the worlds on the way through. And then you kill the giant head in the right place. As he dies, it creates a gateway to hell, which is a completely secret set of extra levels that you can get to. So getting there is fantastically difficult, and you have to do literally everything right on the way through to get there. And then your reward is, hey, here's 4 more incredibly hard levels.
That are almost certain to kill you.
Yeah, exactly. And the amount of times I've blown it either on one of the intervening points, or like, okay, you've got the chest, you've got the Ankh, you've died in the room with the big heads, so now you're ready, and like I'll die in the City of Gold, or I'll die in the temple, because my brain starts to say you're on one here, and it adds a layer of nerves.
Yep, I know exactly what you mean. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? If you get that sensation, that certainty that you're going to fail.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it happens. You let it happen,
It's a weight of expectation, I think, as well, that you put on yourself, because you know how rare the circumstances are. It's like the planets have aligned to get you to that point.
But isn't it wonderful that the games, they sort of evoke this feeling of actual achievement, because they are so hard, because they are so punishing.
Absolutely.
That's a great thing in many respects. I mean, it can be a very dangerous thing as well, and it can become a little bit too obsessive because you're not actually achieving anything. You're just playing a video game. But it does give you this sensation of having achieved something, and that's wonderful. That's quite brilliant.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting thing, isn't it? I mean, there's actually it unearths quite a deep philosophical question about what is it in our characters that makes us want to match up against these almost impossible challenges, right? What is it about that speaks to us as people?
Because by and large, it's quite solitary, isn't it? I mean, barring YouTube and whatnot, Let's Play, no one else is going to really see you achieve this. Even if they do, it's not, in the grander scheme of things, ostensibly, it's not that significant.
It's not, but it's a very personal achievement. I mean, I wrote about this not long ago for Ginger Nuts, talking about the XCOM remake, and the Iron Man Classic Challenge, which is where, I mean, again, for those of you who don't know with XCOM, but basically, so XCOM's a game where you go on a series of missions to shoot up aliens. It's turn-based, but if you play it in Iron Man mode, what it means is the game saves immediately every time you make an action, and it overwrites the previous save, and you only have one save. So there's no taking it back, basically. There's no like, oh, that didn't work, I'll reload and try it a different way. You just you live with the consequences.
Once you've screwed the pooch, you've screwed the pooch, and that's the end of it.
So beating the game in Iron Man mode is really tough, because you have to basically consistently, not just consistently make good decisions, but consistently get lucky on the dice rolls, because it is fundamentally it's a dice rolling game. So you put yourself in a position where you're going to hit 65% of the time, but you've also got to keep making those rolls or survive when you don't. And I remember, so it took me, I don't even want to know how many hours it took me to beat that, but I remember the moment when I got to the final mission, which is the alien mothership, and you're up there with your squad, and my squad are all, they're all captains, or the top majors, they're all the top rank, they've all got all the unlocked abilities and the best armor and the best guns, and it was still it was so nerve-wracking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even though intellectually and rationally it's not that important, in that instant, in that moment, I mean, this is the joy of video games, really, isn't it? It's being able to turn off that rational part of your brain and become a child again, where these things are significant, where things that don't really matter actually matter a great deal to you.
Well, I think the significance comes from not from the thing itself, but I mean, in that instance, for me, the significance was the investment of time and effort. You know, it really was. And again, I think, again, related to that, the understanding of the relative rarity of that event, right? Like, it was a combination of skill and luck that's got me to this point. And now I'm voluntarily rolling that dice one more time. And everything is riding on it. Like, if I fail this, I've wasted
all that time. It's a wonderful thing, though. I actually really appreciate video games that do that, and I love it when video games do it and they're not tricking you. There are lots of video games that pretend that you're achieving something by beating this boss or fulfilling this mission, but you're not. You really aren't. I mean, as much as I love, and don't get me wrong, I really enjoy games like Fallout and like Skyrim and whatnot. I really do, for different reasons. But the mission elements are largely they are a bit of sleight of hand. Really, you're not actually achieving anything. You're not doing anything. You're just going from one place to one place, and you're taking this item to this particular point, and that's it. That's the end of it. Whereas in games like The Binding of Isaac, like XCOM, like Dark Souls, like Bloodborne, you actually are doing something. There is actually a skill element involved in what you do, and that does give you a far superior feeling, I find.
Yeah, and I think as well with the Fallout games, and I'm with you. I adore. I mean, I haven't even played New Vegas yet, but I've played Fallout.
New Vegas is probably the best thus far.
No, I'm looking forward to it. It's sitting there in the shrink. I've got a library of PS3 games. This is why I haven't bought a PS4.
Honestly, of all the Fallout games, that's got the best story.
Okay.
Yeah,
but I mean, I love 3 a great deal, and I love the original isometric ones.
Yeah, me too.
I played them to death. You know. But I think the thing about those games is that the part of what you're talking about, at least, I think, is the leveling aspect.
Yes.
So, like in Fallout 3, I vividly remember the first time you see a super mutant, and it's like fucking Godzilla.
Yeah,
you know, it's like King Kong. You're just like, oh shit, I'm never going to...
You run,
But of course, by the time you come to fight one, you've leveled up, like... a lot of times, and you do actually have the capability to fight it, you know, and you've got the power armor and stuff, and it still feels good when you beat it, but it's not... What Isaac does, and I think what Dark Souls does to a degree as well, even though there's a leveling mechanic in that, it makes you feel like you beat it even though you're still an ant. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's more skill based, isn't it? I mean, there is an element, certainly in the Dark Souls games, and certainly in Isaac, I would say, where it's even when you are souped up to the nines. I mean, it's not true of all of the encounters, but there are still certain encounters that are going to be tremendously difficult. Yeah. And you just need to know how they work. You need to know what to do in order to fight them. Dear God, getting awfully into the spoilers here. There is another secret boss called Hush.
Right.
And Hush, I can't remember what the parameters are to get to him, but you need to get to the womb, and you need to beat It Lives in under a particular time frame, and it's like a really punishing time frame.
Okay.
You need to be phenomenally lucky with your items early on, so that you can just zoom through most of the rooms, you know, so you're not held up.
Right.
And that boss, it doesn't matter how powerful you are, you need to know how it works.
Yeah.
You just need to know how it works, because it's insane. It's insane. It's proper bullet hell. It's proper bullet hell. The screen just fills at times with storms of lethality.
And that's where the kind of brutality of the game design really comes on, because that's, you know, what you're describing there is basically you have to learn these attack patterns intimately in order to be able to beat them.
Yeah.
But the number of hoops you have to jump through to even see the attack patterns once.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's the sadism of that.
I know, right? But it's also the sadism of the game, but the masochism of its audience. That's what I love.
Why do we feel compelled to jump through every single one of those flaming hoops?
I don't know, but it is wonderful. It's something I really like, actually. I've found, for me, I found it. I didn't really notice it as much when I played through Isaac. I just didn't notice, even though it's definitely there. It's definitely an element of why I enjoy it. I didn't notice until I started playing the Souls games, and then I started to articulate it to myself. I remember playing them and thinking, why am I enjoying this?
Yeah.
You know what? This should not be enjoyable. This should be frustrating. If this were any other game, I'd have hurled the control through the screen.
Yeah.
But I haven't, and I'm liking it. I'm liking that the games are being unfair to me. I'm liking that the games are punishing and brutal and hard, and I'm not getting anywhere. It's that feeling. And again, at one time, this was relegated to indie games.
Right.
You know, this was the sole remit of indie games, because the people who are making indie games, as I think you were getting at earlier, they are of this generation who remember. They remember when games were punishingly difficult.
But I also think, I think it feeds on what you were saying. I think as well, though, what's fascinating about those games, and I am thinking particularly of that indie explosion. I love the Souls games, but I think there's something slightly different going on there.
Yeah.
I think with those indie games, with Spelunky and with Isaac and Braid and a few of those others, there's a real feeling of like what you talked about, where that feeling that there's a wider aspect to the game.
Yeah.
You know, there's a depth, a hidden depth that's there. And the truth is, it wasn't there in 48K or 64K because it couldn't be, because you didn't have enough space.
You're absolutely right. It was in
so
total
it was all
delusion.
done through implication.
Yeah,
you
total
know.
delusion in many respects.
Yeah, but what happened is like a whole generation of kids had those same dreams, and some of them grew up to be game designers.
Totally.
And that's how you end up with something as amazingly batshit as Isaac. Because the guy's gone, okay, all that shit I wished had been in a game that looked like this, I'm going to put it in.
Absolutely. And it not only shows you the potential of the form, the elegance of simplicity, or the potential that you can get from sheer simplicity.
Yeah.
What that demonstrates is that there is an argument for games and for media that is pared down, that is much more simplistic. It allows for space for imagination to germinate, as it did when we were children.
Yeah.
You know, it's what I was describing before. It's when you have no notion of the technical limitations, so you start to fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
You start to like project yourself into the two-dimensional side-scrolling wood, or whatever the hell it is, the dungeon, the fortress, whatever.
Sure.
And you start to populate it with your own monsters and your own stories. And in many respects, that simplicity allows for the germination of imagination in the way that something that's a bit more fulsome and that gives you everything doesn't.
Yeah.
You know?
But and I also think there's something about, with Isaac, for me, still what I come back to is it's the combination of simplicity and actually extreme complexity.
Yep.
And it's a brilliant marrying of the two forms, because at its core, especially like the original release, every room's the same size. Every room is the size of a screen. So it's literally just a series of it's a series of arena fights. You move into the room, the door's shut, you kill all the monsters, the door's opening.
That's exactly it. You just move on.
And the only thing that changes is it's a different monster in almost every room. There's this, right, and it chucks on, and the layers come from the encountering the different monsters, figuring out how to deal with them. But then it's like, then you have all these power-ups, and it doesn't tell you what any of them does. You just have to pick it up and figure out what's changed, and then figure out how to adapt your strategy to cope with that. And then, as you said, there's these syntheses that start to appear after a while. But again, even with the synthesis, knowing about them's fine, but it's arbitrary because you've still got to pick up the items on the particular run.
Yes, absolutely, yeah, and that's luck. It's luck-based, isn't it?
Exactly. Knowing about them, all knowing about it means is you can take advantage when it happens. It's still going to happen, and in the meantime, suddenly you're in a situation where that doesn't happen, and you've got these other items you've never seen, and you're having to figure out how they work and work out a different strategy for them.
It is amazing, isn't it?
It's fantastic, but the complexity comes from the almost infinite number of combinations you can have that make each run unique. And then the other absolute bit of genius is every time you beat the game, it changes the game.
Yep. Yeah, and it's almost perfect, isn't it? As a gaming experience, it's very, very difficult to beat.
I think so.
And the fact
I really
that
do.
It's still riding high. As I said, there is a culture around this game. Online, there is an entire culture. There are entire YouTube channels that made their audience on the back of it, and they get thousands of views.
Yeah.
Thousands of views, and they've done this game to death,
Sure.
It is, in many respects, it's the perfect Let's Players game.
Yeah,
it's something
absolutely.
that has germinated on the internet and is part of the culture of the internet. It's part of this digital wilderness that we now operate in, and I find that fascinating. I find it fascinating on multiple different levels.
I think the other thing I find so interesting about it, though, but and this is directly relating to what you said, is that it's done all that, but unlike almost every other indie property that's gone mainstream in any kind of way, it's utterly uncompromised.
Yeah, because it's all his, isn't it? It's all Ed McMillan's. Yeah. He's very protective of it.
Yeah,
I know he's written very at length of how protective of Isaac he is, and the purity of it, because there's some very personal stuff in there. I mean, the themes.
I mean, clearly,
absolutely. I mean, this is a delving into someone's subconscious, and by all accounts, it is Ed's own. There's it's not the abuse that is overt in The Binding of Isaac. It wasn't that extreme by all accounts, but he did grow up in a very similar household where there were similar issues to contend with. And you can see all of his fascinations in it too. I mean, it's not just the Jungian stuff, the Freudian stuff, the religious stuff, the occult stuff. There's also all of these pop culture references to internet culture, to popular movies, to memes, to all video games, all sorts of stuff. It's all incorporated here. And it's the kind of thing where it's esoteric. If you don't know it, you won't get it. But if you get it, it will make you smile.
I mean, two of my favourite gags in the game are the Steam sale item that
great.
Reduces the value of everything in the shop by 50%. And I particularly like that because I bought Isaac in a Steam sale.
On a Steamy sale, yeah.
I actually did. I heard about it on Idle Thumbs, and I went on my Steam account and I added it to my alert list. And when it came up at 50% off in a sale, that's when I bought it. So I mean, that they built that into the mechanic of the game is just hysterical.
It is. There's a level of self-awareness to it, isn't there? Which
And the other thing I really loved was the troll bombs.
Yes.
It's such a simple thing, but it's brilliant. And every time I see that grinning face on the troll bomb as it comes, I feel that surge of like real anger. I'm really angry with that fucking thing. That idiot grinning face as it comes towards me before exploding.
Yes.
And it's like,
And there are layers to that as well. I mean, as the game evolves and updates, they add new stuff in. Like some of the stuff that was rumoured from before, that sort of became mythic amongst the fan base, but which actually wasn't in the game, has now been incorporated into the game. Stunningly clever. Even stuff like breakups and glitches that were in the original game, they've now incorporated as part of the game.
Oh, that's interesting. Because there was a glitch room. I mean, I found that, I think, once in my 100 plus hours. Well, I found the glitch room exactly once.
And that is now standard as part of the game. There are actually now multiple glitch rooms that you can only reach through very particular circumstances. Like it's a percentile roll every time you take a teleport pill, for example, or you use a teleporting item or something like that. Very clever stuff.
Yeah, I'm just lost in admiration, and I'm really happy that the guy's still doing it too. When I think about you think about, I mean, the only mainstream equivalent, which obviously is far more mainstream, with something like Minecraft, where it's clearly it's been sold to Microsoft, and I mean, Minecraft's going to exist forever. I have no doubt about that, and it is its own thing, and I'm not even disparaging of it. I think it's fine. My kid loves it, but I think what I like about Isaac is just that, I mean, in the context of you and I talking about this, it's so fucking dark. Yeah. It is so, so uncompromisingly, unapologetically dark.
And it's also, it's not just dark, it's cruel.
Yeah, it is.
It's cruel. I mean, this it's a game, I mean, it's a strange thing to say, but it's essentially a game about an abused kid.
Yeah, and that's right.
There is no salvation for him here.
Nope.
They never go through the game thinking that there's going to be some happy ending for Isaac, because there's just not. There are multiple endings to the game, and none of them are happy.
I mean, the fundamental mechanic of this game. It's a twin stick shooter where your ammunition/weapon is tears.
Yeah.
I mean, fucking hell.
Yeah, it's an expression of pure misery. It's an expression of absolute misery and weird kind of Freudian obsessions. It's stunningly clever and dark, and it goes for the subconscious, which is, for me, that's usually the way to get me into anything.
Yeah.
If you've got any kind of media that kind of rakes the subconscious and brings all that boiling, seething stuff up to the surface, that's exactly what this game does. And it does it in, I mean, even the structure of the game is structured like a mind. That's essentially what it is. You're descending down through the levels of consciousness down into the very, very fetid depths where the real deep dark stuff resides. It's well,
and the art reflects that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the first couple of cellar levels look basically like your standard like cellar/cave level from any game of that kind that you've played in the last sort of 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just gradually gets weirder and weirder, and the monsters get weirder and weirder.
Yeah.
And then, as you say, I mean, what I like is at a certain point you burst through psychology and enter biology.
Yep.
I love that. I love that when you go beneath psychology, you're left with just flesh and blood.
Flesh and blood, yeah.
Yeah, and the last sort of 2 or 3 levels are just this kind of dripping, literally red raw kind of environment. It's
absolutely, it's gross. I mean, it's distressing, and then beyond that, it goes spiritual.
Yeah,
it becomes abstract again. It's really quite brilliant. There's so much going on here, and I'm sure people have written about it to the nth degree because you can.
There'll be a PhD thesis in it, at least.
Well, yeah, and I know that may sound frivolous to people, writing a PhD about a video game, but there is so much symbolism at work here. There are so many themes that are not outright stated. They're not sort of shoved in your face. The game never stops and says, it never exposits. It never says, now we're descending through this, or this is what this could potentially. It doesn't even intimate. It just plonks you in it and says, make of that what you will.
Absolutely.
Which is
and the other thing,
brilliant.
And the other thing it does with all of that, it retains, and again, we've talked about this before, but that childlike art style.
Yeah. Which makes it
the whole thing
worse.
is filtered through the eyes of an uncomprehending child. And that...
It makes it a million times worse somehow.
Yes,
I mean,
it does.
if it had gone somehow like more synthetically dark, I suppose, if it had become more adult in terms of its portrayal, then it wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have worked. The fact that you've got the way he perceives his mother, for example, when you encounter her, and it is this ogress that is just hands and feet and cankles and things. It's
yeah, I mean, it's an eye, it's a hand that slaps, and it's a stomping foot.
That's how he sees her.
Absolutely brutal.
That's how he sees her. That's what she is to him. There is nothing else to her. It's cruelty and coercion and violence. And that's pretty much it. It's it's horrendous, but it's packaged in such a way that somehow it's managed to avoid causing controversy.
Yeah, that is interesting, isn't it? It hasn't obviously made anyone's kind of video nasty list, despite obviously being like horrendously unsuitable for pretty much everyone.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, that should be on the game, shouldn't it?
Yeah,
pretty much hideously unsuitable for pretty much everyone.
Absolutely,
I'd buy anything that had that on it.
But I stay up far too late playing this fucking game, and then when I go to bed, I can't sleep because I'm thinking about the horrible shit I've just seen. I mean, and worse, not just seen, interacted with, right? Been
engaged, absolutely.
Participated in.
I mean, even
I think that's interesting as well. That instinct of because you're right. There are no good endings, as far as I know. There's no good endings, no matter how deep or high or left or right you go.
Nope.
And yet, part of our instinct as a player, don't we want to get Isaac out of that fucking cellar?
Yeah, you kind of do.
Don't we want that more than anything?
But he's going the wrong way, unfortunately.
Yeah, he's digging down instead of up.
He's going down.
I mean, it's an interesting thing because I was thinking about this as well because I knew we were going to be talking about this. So in college, I did theatre. I did the BTEC in Performing Arts, and I did the theatre strand of it. I actually played Isaac on stage.
What?
Yeah, so
Really?
we did. Yeah, so the first big production we did when I joined, we did the mystery plays, and we did an adaptation of the version that the National Theatre had done like a 6-hour version, and we cut it down to a 2.5-hour 2-act play. But we had a guy playing God who was up on the scaffold tower and all that kind of thing, and we did the Old Testament and the New Testament abridged. And I had 2 parts in it. I played one of the shepherds in the New Testament, but I played Isaac.
Wow.
In the Old Testament, and it was
that's a heavy role.
Yeah, it was amazing. And I remember talking to the director, and I had long hair even back then, and I remember talking to the director about it, and he said what you need to understand is that this is basically this is a rehearsal for Jesus.
Yeah.
So when you're playing Isaac, you're playing a Jesus substitute. And you need to play it like that.
Okay.
You need to, and the dialogue backs that up, because what's fascinating about, I don't. It's been too long since I read the biblical version, but in that version of the play, what's very clear is that Isaac is not. At a certain point in the story, Isaac becomes a willing accomplice to his own murder.
Yeah, that's part and parcel of the themes of the story. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. He is the willing sacrifice.
Yeah. And it's just, in the script there's a line where he says, "Tell not my mother what you did," which is such a great line.
Yeah.
It's just like, he's like, I know you got to do it. Let's go for it.
Just do it. Let's get it over with.
But let's just, don't break Mum's heart over this, okay? And it's, the way it plays out in the script in the play. I was actually like. I was lying on the rock, and he's above me with a meat cleaver, and then God yells, "Stop!" So, we build up to the moment. It was a really big, but I remember, it was quite an incredible thing to do. It was quite an incredible thing to be a part of, even as a performance.
Yeah, it's a key story. It's an Earth text. It's an Earth text, isn't it? It's a story whose themes resonate down. Not just in stuff that directly emulates it, like the Binding of Isaac, but it's everywhere.
Yeah,
it's one of those texts that you need to understand if you want to understand fiction. If you want to understand mythology, it's so fundamentally powerful and pervasive that even people who have no idea what it means, who have no idea what the story is, who've never read it, never heard of it, have heard of it and do know what it means on some level. Because it's pervasive, it's culturally enshrined,
Absolutely. But I think what's interesting for me is someone who's, I'm not a religious person particularly, but what's interesting to me is at the core of it, as I think back on that, and I think back on how I was told to perform that, the big lie of the story is the notion that a child can be a willing participant in something like that.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, without being coerced. Yeah, that's the lie, isn't it?
That a child can have enough sense of what it means to have a sense of agency, to say, yeah, go ahead. That's just. Yeah. We know that. In terms of how our law works, we're very, very clear on that. That's what the age of consent's about, right? It's about saying no. Until you're 16, whatever you think you feel, whatever you believe is going on, you do not necessarily have the toolkit necessary to be making that as an informed decision. So you don't get to make it.
No, absolutely, and
them's the breaks, kid.
You can take it much deeper than that as well. There's a whole sort of philosophical problem here regarding choice and agency.
That's what I love about the game. That's what I love about Binding of Isaac, and that's what I love about particularly picking the name Isaac, because what it's doing is it's kicking over the urn that's it's interrogating the myth, that's the biblical myth that's perpetuated about. No, it's okay, because Isaac's into it, and he's okay with it, and he's gonna, and the game is saying like, no, fuck you.
That, absolutely, yeah. This is a frightened, abused child, and he's basically acting on sort of survivalist instinct, isn't he? At this point,
and just because and also like fundamentally, just because your kid loves you, it doesn't mean you get to do whatever the fuck you want.
Absolutely,
it's not okay.
Absolutely. It's one of the areas where actually I'm surprised it hasn't drawn more in the way of criticism, or of obstruction from certain parties, because it's fairly critical of particular ideologies, is it not?
Yeah. It's profoundly critical of a particular kind of literal strain of evangelical Christianity. I mean, like, unquestionably, uncompromisingly, really fucking angry.
But it also draws it demonstrates how certain stories and certain themes within those traditions could become a basis for abuse in a very real way. Because I can definitely see some wackadoo, some lunatic believing somehow that they are sort of like the next Abraham or whatever, and believing that their child is somehow the next Isaac and that they need to be sacrificed. I can definitely see that. I mean, I'm sure worse has actually happened, I've no doubt.
Yeah. And interestingly, I'm pretty sure that's happened specifically in Christian areas. I mean, it's worth remembering, of course, when we're talking about the Old Testament, we're also talking about the Talmud, right, which is the entire basis of the Jewish religion. But I think there's an interesting thing here where the difference is because the Jewish faith doesn't believe the New Testament is true, they're still waiting for their Messiah. So they actually don't interpret the Old Testament as a way of saying, oh, this stuff's okay because we're doing this thing because it's part of God's... But they're like, no. They look at the Abraham and Isaac story, and to them, they're still waiting for the Jesus figure. So it would be like the height of arrogance, like the worst possible sin you could commit, to kind of be like, oh, I'm going to, to be like Isaac's mother in the game.
Absolutely.
And be like, oh, God, what are you telling me to do? Okay, I'm going to... You're like, no. Because the next, because in the Jewish faith, the next time that happens, it's the real fucking thing, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's something that is, it seems to be very peculiar to very particular incarnations of Christianity as well, which is this sort of biblically literal fundamentalist. Yeah,
it's a very specific subset, a very specific. I mean, I would describe it as a cult.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a very widespread cult, unfortunately. It's certainly a very new cult when you look at it historically.
Absolutely.
But it seems to be. I mean, I think the way you can synthesize it, the way you can narrow it down, is it's Christian imagery mingled with narcissism. That's essentially it. It's the enshrinement of a kind of narcissism with in holy regalia.
I would have to say, as well as the card-carrying socialist in this conversation, it's also an unholy marriage of Christianity and capitalism.
Oh yeah, and it's not even like it's the worst kind of capitalism as well, isn't it? It's like it's that sort of crony corporatism where it's
and it doesn't make any sense. No. I mean, it doesn't make any sense if you're a follower of the man who said, a rich man has less chance in getting into heaven than a camel does passing through the eye of the needle. Yeah, like that does not, to relay that against every single, pastor of my religion should have their own private jet.
Yeah, it's insane, isn't it? It's. I mean, I know we're sort of getting off the beaten track here, but there are not many things that Christ is unambiguous about in the Gospels.
No.
There are not many things that are absolutely consistent from gospel to gospel, or that are not open to interpretation. One of the things that is absolutely crystal, one of the things that is unambiguous and consistent in every incarnation of the man that exists in writing, he hates money.
Yeah,
and it's not it's not excessive money, it's not money that's used for this, it is just money. He hates money and material goods. It's unambiguous,
I mean, the willful misinterpretations around render unto Caesar just make me laugh, because it's just like it's so transparent. What he's saying is like, fuck money.
Yeah,
just fuck it.
Absolutely, yeah. It's. But I mean, what that demonstrates to me, and I know that there are actually a lot of critics of religion who would not use this line of argument, who in fact criticise this line of argument. But what that demonstrates to me is they don't believe what they proclaim to believe.
No,
they really don't.
No. And they haven't, I mean, in a lot of cases, I'm afraid, they haven't read what forms the basis of their religion.
No, they
just haven't.
They just haven't, no. And are not willing to. That's the worst of it. That's the very worst of it.
I mean, we're a little off the beaten track maybe, except I think when you look at the introduction of this game,
Yeah,
it's engaging with that stuff in the most direct way possible.
You're absolutely right. It is. I mean, it's not. It's one of the few areas of the game, actually, the early part that is unambiguous. You know, it's telling you what is happening.
Yeah.
You know, unless you assume that somehow even that is somehow part of Isaac's delusions or whatever, and then nothing can be trustworthy, or it's all happening in Isaac's mind. But no, you're absolutely correct. That it is engaging with those themes, and it's a heavy-ass criticism of them.
Well, and I think, I mean, for me, the only ambiguity in it is whether or not it is actually the voice of God that's talking to his mother, or a voice of delusion. Right?
Yes,
I mean, that's where you could.
Yeah.
I mean, if you wanted to find some wiggle room, that's where you could say, like, so does God exist and he's an incurable sadist?
Yeah.
Or is his mother
way,
insane? And that's an open question.
Either way, it's pretty bad, isn't it?
Yeah.
In fact, that's...
And interestingly, actually, that's a question the game steadfastly refuses to answer.
It does, because Satan turns up. Satan turns up a couple of times, but God doesn't.
Nah.
Ever.
That's very interesting, yeah.
There is no God in these games yet.
And yet it is possible for Isaac to kill Isaac in such a way that Isaac ascends.
Yeah. Yeah.
Make of that what you will.
Make of that whatever you want. Yeah. Symbolism, ladies and gents. There's a lot going on here. There's a lot going on beneath the surface.
But you're right. The most fantastic thing, because we've talked at some length now about all of that stuff, and yet for me the most impressive thing about all of that is none of it is even close to explicit.
No, there's no, you know, after the cutscene, there's no dialogue.
No,
this
is a twin stick shooter.
Yeah,
where you periodically pick up resources and power ups and get better at shooting and face more complicated creatures, more complicated opponents in each room you get into, and you fight bosses and you beat enough bosses and you beat the game. It's absolutely as simple as that.
It is bog standard. I mean, there were like Amstrad games from and Atari games from yonks ago, from the very earliest days of home video gaming or even arcade gaming, that were more complicated than this. In terms of its base mechanics, and yet from it you can extrapolate all this stuff. And I think it's amazing.
And the other thing about why it was so important that this game is indie is because you cannot make a game like The Binding of Isaac by committee.
No,
you cannot.
No, it is offensive. There's no doubt about that. It's deliberately offensive. On a number of levels.
But it's also visionary.
Yeah, totally.
And as you say, I mean, this guy has retained creative control throughout all the iterations of the game, and it shows, because I mean, you know, I was watching that playthrough of yours. Now, that was alien to me. I didn't know the Ultra Greed boss. I didn't know the level. I didn't know the game mode was new to me, but it felt like Isaac. Immediately, I knew. Just, you know, it dripped that atmosphere and that feeling, and that's the only way to get that is when you've got someone who is inside of the vision, who completely believes in it, completely owns it, completely runs it.
It's undiluted, isn't it? It is something pure. It's something bizarrely pure. It's an odd word to use for this game.
And the purity is part of what makes it disturbing, right? Because it is so weirdly personal. And as you said, what's great about that is I don't know how it's personal, why it's like, I don't know what in this guy's brain produced this stuff. We can point at Jungian archetypes, we can point at religion, and we can point at Freud, and yes, those are clearly part of what's going on. But there's also something that's going on that just lives inside the mind of this creator.
And it's entirely his own.
All that.
It's entirely his own, and that it just makes it that much more special, doesn't it? It makes it that much more intriguing, and it seems to be something that happens periodically at the moment in indie gaming. I mean, we had it with Undertale not terribly long ago, which again is this. It's a game that's made by it's like a team of about maximum 10 people, if that, which is the vision of one guy. And it's so personal, and again, it's so simple. I mean, graphically, I would say it's even more simple than Isaac.
Oh, far more, yeah.
Yeah, and
absolutely.
and yet it's become a phenomenon. You know, it's made waves. It's made cultural waves on the internet, just as Isaac has. And I imagine, in 10 years' time, Undertale will be resonating around in the same way that Isaac still is now.
I mean, that's interesting, isn't it? Undertale, I think, had even more fidelity to that notion of the lo-fi gaming. I think Undertale,
completely.
It deliberately looked like a sub-NES role-playing game.
Yeah,
I mean,
they really wanted to evoke that feeling that you are playing a game on these systems. It has fidelity, it has legitimacy.
Absolutely. And I think that, I mean, I remember, full disclosure, it's a game that I've engaged with very, very briefly. I've spent more time reading about it than I have playing it, let's put it like that, at this point. But there's a lovely article on Steam where the creator talks about how ambivalent he feels about the game's success.
Yeah, I mean...
Like, he genuinely was like, I made this for me. I wasn't expecting this to be a big thing, and I'm kind of still a bit weirded out about the level of exposure and success it's had. Because
talk about exposure and success, it's a phenomenon.
Yeah.
It's an absolute phenomenon. There are people who make animations, and there are musical performances, and it's ridiculous. Right. It's become just insane.
But I'm not surprised, because it speaks to the people of our generation who grew up with those games.
Oh, totally.
And we want to see the stuff we want to see the art we grew up with interrogated. We want to see the games we grew up with interrogated, and we want to see the depth that we imagined realized.
Yeah. And it's also just a good game, you know. It's
right.
well made. It's a beautiful story. It's got there are certain sort of base elements that just work, and they resonate with people. The characters are wonderful, you know, and the fact that they are so highly characterized, even though they're just these tiny little blocky sprites with the little profile faces next to them. They don't even have voices, you know. It's all text.
Yeah, it's all text. That's right. Yeah,
it's brilliant. It's stunningly brilliant. I mean, actually, I'm going to stop myself there, because if we get onto Undertale, I'll go on forever.
No, I mean, the other game that I think I'd flag in that kind of peripheral areas, there's one I played recently called Papers, Please.
I don't know that one.
Papers, Please is really fun. So Papers, Please, you're a border guard in an unspecified Eastern European country, and your job is to assess the whether or not the people who you're seeing in front of you are eligible to come into your country.
Ooh, that's an interesting position to be in.
And it's really simple. You start off with you have a list of rules. You have the passport. You have things you've got to check. And the game is brilliantly weighted so that, certainly from my initial playthroughs, you're always just slightly slower than you want to be. Because you get paid based on how many people you let through. Right. And you have your wages at the end of each week. Your wages come in, and then the amount of money you have to pay for your family goes out. Your rent goes out, and then you see if you get thrown in the gulag or not because you're a debtor. And you're always right up against it. It's really intelligent. But the thing is, what happens? So that's the first day, but then the second day they change the rules and say, okay, so people from this country, we're not letting them in anymore. So you've got to check the passport for this additional bit of data. And then they say, you got to make sure. And then here's what happens: you let someone through because you've done all the checks you're supposed to do, and then you get this telex through, this noise comes, and this thing comes up and it says, you've let someone through, and they didn't have the same gender as it said on their car, and you're like, are you serious? And then you have this thing where the body scan comes in. And if you look at someone and they don't look like they match the gender on their passport, you have to do a body scan to see whether or not they're male or female biologically. And you're just like, are you fucking kidding me?
Wow.
And the brilliance of the game is, like, if you don't do the body scan, your family starves, right? That's the mechanic.
So there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. But the only reason I brought it up is because the graphical interface, it looks like maybe C64 level.
Wow. Because so I imagine it wouldn't need to be any higher than that, would it? But the fact that it's dealing with such subject matter, so topical now. Wow.
And yet it is very topical, but it's also very dated. It also feels very Cold War. So it's really interesting how, like, it's a synthesis of themes where it's like, it's really depressing that the Cold War feels relevant again, right? I mean, that's just
that in and of itself.
Are you fucking kidding me?
In and of itself, that's majorly depressing.
Well, Christ, I mean, you're a very similar age to me, right?
Yeah.
You will have a vivid memory of the Berlin Wall coming down.
Yeah,
right?
certainly do.
Like, what an incredible moment in human history, and we were so fucking sure that we were entering a new era or something, right?
Yeah,
and now it's like Russian interference with elections and fucking spies and diplomats being expelled. Like, really?
Yeah. Assassinations.
This rerun sucks, you guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really writes the new material.
That's history, isn't it? Just whoever's in charge of history, they need to get some inspiration and stop.
Oh, I've been saying this for a while now. God's the shittiest novelist I've ever fucking met.
Absolutely.
I would not get away with this shit for a second. People would call shenanigans in it. Like, it's so contrived.
Yeah.
The coincidences and themes are so obvious. What, are you trying to beat people over the head with them?
It's so ridiculous as well. It's so absurd. No one's going to believe that. It's absurd. Oh, man. Oh, that sounds actually... It's the kind of game that I probably wouldn't play for pleasure, but I'd probably play to feel something.
I tell you what's impressive about Papers, Please. It's kind of addictive. That's what the brilliance of it is. You start to clue into it, and you start to feel like, if I can just get ahead of the bureaucracy, because they literally change the rules on you every day. Every day you come on shift, you have a new set of rules, and sometimes it contradicts what you were doing the day before. Sometimes it builds on it, or normally what it does is add a layer of complexity that makes your job fucking harder.
Yep.
And you just feel like, if I can just stay ahead of it, it's really, really clever.
That sounds brilliant. I'm surprised I haven't heard of it, to be perfectly honest. That sounds like the kind of thing I would be interested in.
It's a good game. It's a small number of pounds on Steam, and it's a really, as I say, it's a low disk space game.
Yeah, it sounds it. It sounds it.
And my memory is it's got maybe a very small number, like 10 or 14 endings, so it's not one that takes a huge amount to play through. But yeah, it's so. I mean, the moment when you the first couple of playthroughs, I didn't make it to week 2. The first time I made it to week 3, and they give you a key to the gun cabinet so that you can shoot people who try and get across the border without having gone through passport check. Yeah.
So it escalates. It escalates profoundly.
No, it's just fucked up. I mean, after day 2, there's a bombing, so for day 3, people from that country aren't allowed in anymore. And, there's all this kind of shit. And then it's like, diplomatic relations have improved, so if someone's coming from that country, as long as they've got a permit, you can let them in. And then it's like, people from this country and that country have to have work permits, or you can't let them in. The layers of bureaucracy get worse and worse and worse. And again, the genius of it is you always feel like you're behind the curve.
Yeah.
You know, and again, in the back of your mind, it's like, if I don't earn enough money this week, if I don't stamp enough of these passports, my family's going to fucking starve.
Yeah, I mean, the satire is high. It's acute, isn't it? And a little bit personal. It's actually really grinding right near the knuckle, that, isn't it?
My favourite recurring joke in it, and I still haven't sussed it out, but there's a guy who turns up, and literally on day 1 or day 2, and his passport is just a laughable forgery. Like, it's appallingly bad. And this guy literally comes back every single day, and every single day the forgery is slightly improved. And he literally greets you with like, "Hello, my friend. So good to see you again." And you're like, "Oh my God, wow. Not this guy."
Brilliant. So you're actually sort of getting personal with the guy because you see him so often.
Totally. But also, the forgery is getting tougher, because if you refuse them access, you've got to be able to justify it.
Oh, God.
So it actually becomes really tough, because you're like, I know this is bullshit, but I don't know why it's bullshit.
Yeah, so you've got to identify.
You get really paranoid, like, how the fuck? I've got to stop him getting in, because I know I'm going to fuck up if I let him in, but it looks right.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. Yeah. Totally into that. Oh, right, but there does seem to be it does seem as though there is this level of commentary that occurs in indie games at the moment, to the point whereby they comment upon everything. They're not just like the subjects in Binding of Isaac, but politics, and even on the nature of video games themselves.
Right.
They become like meta games.
Well, I feel like Isaac does that.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons Isaac is probably one of the, if not one of the very finest examples of this genre, is precisely that it finds a way to comment on that really unfair mechanic in video games by building it into the theme.
Yeah.
It's so smart.
It's so clever because you accept it, don't you? You accept it, and actually you learn to have fun with it.
But then also, don't you find yourself at some point questioning the fact that you've accepted it?
Yes,
of course. Like you've internalized abuse.
Yeah,
in the same way that Isaac had.
Oh, you could just keep going. It's like you said earlier, the rabbit hole.
Oh yeah.
It's actually an infinite rabbit hole, isn't it? It's just rabbit holes all the way down.
Yep.
Utter brilliance. Utter brilliance.
Genius.
Yeah. And it's excited me. It makes me want to go back and play it, and I really want to see what's going on with Isaac now. You know, what the new versions are going to be like.
Right.
Because
I mean, that's an interesting thing, because for me, I'm still very, very emotionally attached to the original version of the game.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it is. I think it's really odd. You can't say this kind of thing without it sounding like criticism, and I don't mean it to. The newer version of the games are wonderful, and they're great, and the innovations it makes are great. But there's something, for me personally, there is something about the purity of the
original. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for example, every single room being a single screen,
which they are not anymore, of course.
Which they're not, no, because I've played the remastered remake version, and you know, some of the rooms scroll in various, and it. Don't get me wrong, in terms of gameplay, I appreciate the evolution, but I have such 120 hours, right? I have this attachment to that vision, and the music on the original game.
Yes, which is now quite different.
Yeah, and there's just more of it. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. But in the original game, there's literally two themes. There's there's three. There's you're in a fight, there's you're no longer in a fight, and there's you're in a fight with a boss. And those are the three themes that you get. And they just I have a Pavlovian biological response to those themes at this point. If I were to hear the boss sting, you know, I'd be like, fuck.
Yeah. You'd actually panic.
The adrenaline would hit, and I'd be like, what's going on? And the art style, again, they've improved the art in a lot of ways. They've certainly updated it, and they've increased the complexity of it. But there's something about there's a simplicity to that original game and the art style that just floors me.
There's big, heavy black lines.
I admit it's an emotional attachment rather than an intellectual one, and I fully, you know, like I'm not trying to pretend it's a better game, like it transparently isn't.
Yeah. But there's an association with it for you, isn't there?
I've built a relationship with it.
Yeah, I totally understand. In fact, there are Isaac runners who do that occasionally. They regress the game back to its original state so they can play it in a sort of more innocent way or a purer way.
I'd love to do that again. I'd love to start it again at some point. I mean, I can't imagine how I would do this because I'm deeply attached to the progress I've made. That's the part of the brilliant paradox of the game, right? But I would love to try. I'd love to do that first run again. What you can't get back though is the ignorance. What you can't get back is that first run of I have no fucking idea what's going on.
Oh, of course, you can never go home again. No. It's
and again, how well does that fit with the
themes of the game? Yeah,
this is
it's like a text, isn't it? It is like something you could take into a literature studies class and ask them to analyze, or an art class or something. And it bears that degree of analysis.
Yes, absolutely. And I think what I'm particularly impressed by is I believe, I don't know, but I don't think it's like the creator backed into any of this.
Oh God,
I think he really, really figured this shit out.
Oh yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm sure there are some elements that are entirely sort of a matter of serendipity, you know, they've just sort of come together. But for the most part, certainly in terms of the themes of the thing, yeah, definitely, he knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
He's aware of what's going on here. And he definitely has, from what he's written about the game, he definitely has this idea of how he wants it to communicate to people, you know, which is not with text and exposition and whatnot. He wants people to engage with it on the level that he wants them to engage with it.
But I also think he understands. I was thinking about this. Okay, so I recently did a podcast and therefore recently reread The Long Walk, which was, I believe, actually was King's first novel. which was published under the Bachman pen name.
I was going to say, yeah, and it's now available as part of a compilation, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right, the Bachman books. And when you read that, one of the things that you're forcibly struck by is he hits themes and ideas that were, given his age, must have been basically impossible for him to have consciously put together.
Yeah.
It must have been instinctive. And yet it's clearly there. It's unarguable that it's part of the text and that it's part of the theme, it's part of the subtext. You know, it's built into the... And you know, that fits with our knowledge of King as an instinctual writer.
Yeah.
This is a guy that creates that. You know, like, he famously doesn't plot. He just gets a character and
starts
a premise
writing, doesn't he? He
just
sits and starts writing.
And trusts that the story will happen. And it strikes me that the central realisation within Binding of Isaac, whether the designer knew this or not, he understood this either intellectually or instinctively, is that there's kind of an inherently abusive relationship between the player and the game.
Yeah, and as a result,
Actually.
he's sort of emphasised that throughout. You know, he's played upon it. He knows that somehow, I don't know whether it's conscious or whether it's something that he just does, but he seems to understand that this is the core of the appeal for this game. In the same way as, it's just exactly as you were saying earlier, it's in the same way that, you know, like an abusive spouse knows that there are degrees of abuse that are part and parcel of that relationship. It's, it's quite scary, actually. It's quite... It's quite distressing.
One of the connections, I mean, you know, as we're talking about that, I mean, one of the connections I have with Isaac is that, I mean, we talked about earlier about that feeling of arbitrariness, where, you know, the classic thing is you pick up the power up and you don't know what it does until you pick it up. And then there's that thing where over time you develop more understanding of what the individual power ups do, and you start to gain a knowledge, and that mirrors, to a really disturbing degree, it maps onto the way a victim of abuse starts to recognise patterns within the behaviour of their abuser, and how they can anticipate those patterns and how they can respond to them in ways that minimise the damage.
Absolutely, or even preempt them, you know, when they need to. Yeah, it's...
But at its core, the genius of Isaac is, it's still fucking arbitrary. You will still either get that item you've never fucking seen before, or get that item you know will not fucking help you. And then you're just stuck.
You're just screwed,
and you just got to get on with it as best you can. And it's like, how in the fuck did you like here's the thing, you and like, we're gamers, right? To various degrees, and we're both gamers who are writers, okay? So we know, I mean, I don't know about you, but when I look on Steam and I look at that 120 hours spent on Binding of Isaac, I have a very complicated relationship with that figure, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I really do, because there is a part of me that looks at that and says, that's at least a fucking novella.
Yep.
That's, or, you know, 3/4 of a novel, or a good half a dozen short stories at minimum. I mean, at absolute minimum. That's a lot of your time.
It's a lot, the investment, and that's even before you start to get into like emotional and intellectual investment. You know, that's even before that happens, just in terms of raw time.
Raw time, you know, and it's like, time is one of the few absolutely guaranteed finite resources that we all have. And by the way, the terrifying thing about time is we don't even know how finite it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Right?
Are these our halfway point in our lives, or are these our last hours? We don't know for sure.
We absolutely don't know. And I know exactly what you mean. It is something I struggle with regards to video games. It seems more than any other medium, and I don't know why that is. I'm not entirely sure why that is, but I don't know whether it's because there is still something in my mind that says that they are entirely frivolous, even though I know they're not. Even though I know there's more going on here, you know, they're engaged with it at least to the same degree as film or as literature or whatever. But yeah,
I recognise their worth as a form, absolutely, and I mean the game that we're talking about, I'd be happy to pick that. I mean, that's probably my finest example. I'd say to anyone who thinks that games don't have any artistic merit, I would just strap them to a chair and make them play Binding of Isaac.
Make them play
and then be like, right, so fuck you, you know, Because even if you didn't enjoy the experience, you'd have to. I think
you would have to admit, wouldn't you? Unless you were lying to yourself that there's something going on here, you know?
Yeah. I think my issue with gaming is that there is an inherent. I think my problem with it, or my concern with it, or whatever you want to call it, there's a selfishness to it.
Mm-hmm.
Or that's my perception anyway, is that there's a selfishness to it that doesn't exist. Because, I mean, writing is a very solitary experience.
Totally.
And arguably a selfish one, because it's just you and the keyboard. But I think the thing with writing is, at a certain point, you put it out into the world.
That's right, yeah.
And maybe you write for yourself, but certainly when you get to D2 and you're editing, you are thinking about your audience at that point. You're thinking about, how do I best convey to someone I don't know what I'm trying to convey.
So it becomes a matter of communication, whereas video games don't necessarily.
No, whereas with video games, what I've got is, hey, I got the gold trophy for completing XCOM on Iron Man Classic.
Yeah, it's an insular experience, isn't it? It provides something for you. And that's
anybody care?
Yeah. You know? But it's a complex thing, isn't it? I mean, as we discussed earlier, it's complex in terms of what it does perform for you and how that. Right. I know that, for example, my experiences with video games as a child heavily influence the shape of my imagination and the way the output that it has. Things like environment, for example, are heavily influenced by video game environments. I know that for a fact. Certain forms of imagery that crop up from time to time, the ways that realities are slightly malleable in everything I write. Very video game indeed. So there is an element of input here too. I mean, there is an element of enhancement of imagination depending on what you're consuming, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, I was thinking there was a really shitty Amstrad game called it was Cycle of the Werewolf, Attack of the Werewolf. And basically you played a werewolf and you walked around and you were a human in daytime and you were a werewolf in nighttime, and you could go in the sewers, you could go in the towns were populated by people, and basically to win the game you had to kill the 7 members of your family that had cursed you.
Right, okay.
But the mechanic was completely arbitrary, because the way you kill them is you just walk around until like a cross started flashing, which meant that one of the people on the screen that you were seeing was a member of your family.
Right,
that was the only way you could identify them. You had to be in werewolf form to kill them, and then you'd eat them. As soon as you ate them, the cops turn up and they shoot you. And they shoot you, and in werewolf form you'd be shot and you'd heal the injury, but you'd stay injured. But if you didn't get health in time, then they'd put you in a cell, you'd turn into human form and you'd die. Right. And the thing is, basically the game was, as far as I can tell, unbeatable.
Oh, right.
Like the most I ever managed was to kill like 3 members of the family. Because each one you killed, the next one was exponentially harder to find. I'm pretty sure it was done through random number generator, so it was a roll of the dice every screen you went in. And because of the mechanics of having to feed as a werewolf in order to keep your health up, that would summon cops, and that would mean that you had this overload. Like, you'd always end up bleeding out in your cell, basically, if you didn't get shot to death. And I still remember the impact that the nihilism of that has.
I mean, totally. It's interesting, isn't it, that what was essentially a flaw in the game became something philosophical. It actually became part and parcel of you.
It really did. And I think about especially my early fiction and the stuff I wrote, and it's like, actually there is a certain what it really instilled in me, and bear in mind I was 12 or 13, almost the perfect age to absorb that kind of stuff.
Absolutely,
this nagging suspicion that basically fundamentally you're gonna fucking die. Like you're gonna lose and you're gonna die, and that's kind of it. And it's a really weird thing to learn from a relatively shitty video game.
Shitty video game, but it does. I mean, again, not to open up another can of worms, but it demonstrates how we learn and how our imaginations actually work, where they can take such simple fodder and turn them into something profound, especially at that age where they haven't yet been quite ridiculed out of doing so, or educated out of doing so, I suppose you could argue. But the funny part of that is, but then I get to A-level English and they're sitting down and they're making me read Hamlet.
And it's like, this is the same fucking shit I learned from the werewolf.
This is what I learned from the werewolf.
Like, everything you try and do turns to shit, and everybody dies. At the end. Like,
everything is interconnected. You know, everything is interconnected.
I learned that from video games.
It's part of the wider absurdity of being, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's so strange. I mean, and I find myself daily just flabbergasted by that. There are things that crop up like that where that seems so strange and so absurd. So I got this impression from, I don't know, a Transformers toy or a cartoon or a whatever, a video game, and yet it has become profound.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely. And it's particularly funny when you think like it probably wasn't the intention of the creator.
It probably wasn't. They would probably have no notion that it was even possible. And yet it has. That's the impression that it's left on, and a mind that's still forming, or an imagination that's still developing, and shaped the input and the shape and the output of that imagination, of that mind. It's quite wonderful. It's quite wonderful. I can tell that it's late because we're sort of spiraling out into bizarre philosophy now.
But to tie it back to Isaac, the thing that connects that back to Isaac is that notion that, you know, that thing you talked about like there's just no happy ending for this kid.
No.
And yet we are compelled to keep trying to find it.
Yeah, there is something in you that wants it, isn't it? There's something in you.
Yeah.
And it's not only that, there's no real resolution. All the endings are really strange and abstract and slightly symbolic like the rest of the game. It never really tells you what's going on. So you are left wanting more all the time. You're left with this notion that, well, if I just do this, if I beat this mode, if I beat all the modes, maybe I'll get the proper ending. And you won't. You'll get an ending that's different from all the others, but you won't get.
If we can just make Isaac cry hard enough.
Yeah.
And smart enough, like
maybe he can.
I mean, that's again, you're back to the genius of the mechanic. It's so painful.
Yeah, maybe he can wash away all of the shit. Maybe he can wash away all of the blood. Maybe all of the abuse. Maybe he can be reborn. You know.
Well, I mean, that's the ultimate promise of therapy, right? We cry hard enough and for long enough, and we come out fixed. Somehow,
yes, somehow. You know? Yes, or purged. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's actually much more profound than you would maybe expect from, say, a surface level engagement with the game. Yeah. And it's quite stunning. It's quite stunning.
Well, and I would say actually on that point, it's interesting to me. I think one of the things that I find fascinating about the game is it's actually kind of it's kind of hostile to a first playthrough.
Yeah. Oh God, is it? Yes.
One of the things the game does is it kind of self-selects for obsessives.
Mm-hmm.
It self-selects for the kind of people who will read into it enough to get out of it when they want to get out of it. It's yet another layer of the genius of the game.
Well, yeah. Because there's
a lot of people who will play this once and just be like, well, fuck that.
Yeah, absolutely. And also bear in mind, in the first playthrough, there's nothing available. There's hardly anything available. Most of the upgrades are bog basic. You haven't unlocked them yet. Yeah. So getting through a first playthrough is actually very, very difficult. It's quite punishing.
Yeah. Oh, getting through the first 20 hours is a motherfucker. It's brutal. It's just the game, as I said, it keeps punching you in the face.
Yeah, and kicking you while you're down for good measure.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I say, if you're either incurious, right, or you're not the kind of person for whom that kind of gaming challenge appeals, that, you know, one playthrough will be enough. You'll play that game once and you'll be like, fuck that.
Yep.
And you'll uninstall it and you'll go about your life.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that baked into the design is an attraction to us weirdos. You know?
Totally, yeah. It's going to
feel like
to
get punched in the face and we're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
You're going to do that again. What?
It becomes a puzzle almost, doesn't it? It becomes something that you want, you know?
And then obviously you're left with the very interesting question of what exactly is fucking wrong with us?
Yeah, what is wrong with us? What is it we actually want from this and everything else, you know?
What is broken in us that the Binding of Isaac forms part of the answer?
Yeah.
What on earth could be the question at that point?
Wow. On that note, ladies and gents, because there is, there's more to discuss there.
Yep.
I think that might be a subject for a future Strange Playgrounds episode or a discussion, Kits.
Sounds good to me, man.
Because on that note, I think we will leave it. I think we have.
Works for me.
Wow, I think we've bled and wept and shat this one dry, to be honest.
But in all seriousness, everything we've talked about, what I would say, in the unlikely event you're listening to this and you've never played Binding of Isaac,
wow.
There is an incredible thing there. There is an incredible work of art.
There's an artifact there. There's a cultural artifact to engage with, and something very, very personal, something that requires work to get the best out of, and pain, but well worth the exercise, worth the experience.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Kit. Thank you so much for that discussion. That was fantastic, actually.
No, thank you for having me on it. I mean,
absolute pleasure.
We've battered this one for months.
Yeah, and it's just,
I knew I wanted to get to it.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? And I'm so glad it went the way it did, where it's just a natural conversation. It just, that's just wonderful.
Yep.
Best way to discuss this subject, I think. So, until next time, ladies and gentlemen, bye-bye!